So as y'all are probably well aware, we are at 134. So we have a couple more folks that will get seated. I see their stuff next to me. So once they're here and have quorum, we'll get started. So I'm thinking less than a minute. All right, good afternoon and welcome. I am Councilmember Jason Dozier. I'm the Chair of the Community Development and Human Services Committee. Call this meeting to order, and I just love banging that gavel. I am joined by fellow council members to my right, Councilmember Destin Hillis, to my left, Councilmember Matt Westmoreland, and Councilmember Jason Winston. Next item on the agenda is to adopt the agenda. I'll move to adopt. Can I get a second? Second by Winston. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
The agenda is adopted, 4 yeas, 0 nays. Next item is approval of minutes. I'll move to approve the minutes. Can I get a second? Second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
Westmoreland. The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
The motion to approve the minutes is adopted, 4 yeas, 0 nays. Next on the agenda is public comment.
Just one speaker?
One speaker for public comment. Let's see, we have, I can drill down, Carol Holiday. Good to see you, Ms. Holiday. Do you need?
See if I can do that without knocking anything down. I am Carol Holiday. I live at 532 Hardendorf Avenue. I attended every tree protection ordinance public review from 2018 through 2021. I studied every document and provided careful input throughout the entire process. An astounding number of citizens attended meetings and engaged in the process. We care about this city and we recognize the importance of the tree canopy for the future, especially as we face the unprecedented challenges of a changing climate. In 2021, when the process went silent, I followed up repeatedly about the status of updates to the ordinance. I was shocked and dismayed in 2021 when there was an attempt to bring a new TPO up for vote by City Council in the last 2 weeks of December without citizen notification. After a lengthy process during which the public was asked for and provided significant and substantive input. I was heartened when the document was pulled, and it seemed that the city understood that bypassing the citizens was not acceptable. Imagine my surprise when I reviewed the CDHS agenda yesterday and learned that updates to the TPO are to be voted on today without any citizen notification or vetting. I have religiously attended both Lake Claire Neighbors and NPUN meetings throughout 2022. At no time did the city acknowledge that changes to the ordinance were proposed. At no time have the proposed changes been presented. At no time have we been notified that changes to the TPO were to be voted on by City Council. To say I am disappointed in this process is an understatement. The process seems to mock those of us who have spent considerable time and effort over many years to work toward a better ordinance that reasonably and effectively protects Atlanta's invaluable canopy. Yet again, we are faced with a lack of transparency. Yet again, we see a total disregard for an engaged citizenry. Trust in our elected officials depends upon both transparency and regard for the citizens. I urge you to hold the ordinance and offer your constituents the courtesy of an opportunity to review and comment on the proposal before you vote on it. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you, Ms. Holliday. Our next speaker is Zachary Murray, and I have on here that Zachary's our last speaker, but I imagine there's a couple other folks that. No, it's not, ma'am, but we can try to accommodate you. If you can, if you can go see Jared, raise your hand, Jared, one more time. If you're here to speak publicly, please be sure to chat with him. I just want to make sure that everyone has opportunity to provide public comments.
All right, good afternoon. I wanted to speak on 3 items. The first is the Housing Commission. It's to me unacceptable that a number of those meetings have been canceled. I came and paid for parking once without notice of cancellation. If the city staff can't attend, to me these calendars are set out a year in advance, like your calendar for committee. It reflects either a level of unprofessionalism or a desire to have a really lack of transparency at a very critical time for affordable housing. Those meetings need to be rescheduled if they can't make those. I trust they're busy people, but that's a really critical point in time for the public to offer comment about what's happening on affordable housing. And so 2 meetings in a row and another meeting, 3 meetings within 4 months is simply unacceptable. I have recommendations that you all change the structure of the Housing Committee to include more community representatives like Miracle Fletcher, who you all are approving today, that the city staff become ex officio members so that they can't hold up quorum, and that we can continue the process of getting public feedback and perception to the agenda that the city's passing in terms of affordable housing. Now onto the Housing Trust Fund. This is another area of concern. I wanted to just echo the recommendations of the Housing Justice League in terms of our concern. The City Council has not developed guidelines. Again, praise to you all for developing the funding, but we need very clear guidelines around how proposals for access to that funding get put forth and get selected. We need an open, public, accessible, and transparent process for approving such expenditures in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, and we need those to be adopted by January 1st, 2023. We don't want to hold up the process. We want to make sure there is a process, and right now there isn't. I support the recommendations that the first $20 million of that funding be set aside for households earning 50% AMI, and that that be a priority moving forward in the process, as well as ensuring that the funding goes to households earning no more than 80% AMI, because this is the largest area of need, which I'll touch on next with the Atlanta Housing Authority. Make sure that the funding is available as equity and subsidy, directly, fully forgivable debt. This is what projects need, especially those that are serving the lowest income groups, in order to move forward. We don't need more loans. We need more public residual receipts funding, whatever it's going to take for you all to ensure there's equity that goes into these capital stacks. And one recommendation I care very dearly about is that you all appoint a citizen selection committee to review all applications for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund to ensure that it represents what the people's interest is. We trust in you all to not develop a slush fund, but to develop a trust fund where there's a clear process and guidelines, not a giveaway to your favorite developers and your friends. Moving on to the Atlanta Housing Authority. My worst fears about Bowen Homes were confirmed by the report that came out in the AJC, which listed their full analysis of what's going to happen there. 250 units capped at 80% AMI, 252 at 60, 254 at 120, 1,136 at market rate. The Atlanta Housing Authority needs to be in the business of housing low-income people, especially extremely low-income people, because that is where the greatest gap exists. The fact that they consider this mixed community project but exclude the lowest and most extremely low-income people reveals that they don't have an interest in that, and they're moving forward in a land grab at Bowen Homes and not housing the people who their missions requires them to house. In addition, if you're going to do homeownership, do a community land trust to ensure that the benefit is available to households in perpetuity, not just to one household who gets to benefit from being on public land and get affordable housing, but to households in perpetuity. You all know the best practices, meet the objectives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Murray. Our next speaker is Will Ramirez.
Good afternoon, City Council members. Good afternoon, Chair. I'm going to read excerpts from a letter that was sent to committee chairs last week, the Office of the Mayor and City Council President on HOPWA. As the city moves forward in continuing to address the housing needs of people living with HIV, we appreciate the momentum of the moment, but urge and encourage you to build on it and address other issues associated with housing instability impacting the community. This letter was specifically named 4 areas where innovative responses and resource allocations are needed to address housing instability impacting persons living with HIV and present an opportunity for collaboration with federal partners to alleviate future funding reductions. First, the most recent reports of individual and families on the central intake waiting list seeking HOPWA services at 280. The upcoming reduction in HOPWA funding that the city will experience, for which the task force is being created in response to, will further exacerbate the pressure on this list of persons living with HIV. The number of people on this list is undoubtedly an undercount. Many people living with HIV often give up seeking housing from the city altogether and revert to seeking housing by other means, such as couch surfing or trading survival sex for a roof over their heads. For those who are transgender, non-binary, and gender diverse individuals living with HIV, the barriers faced are sometimes amplified due to the discrimination and stigma. For the city to be effective in addressing housing for persons living with HIV, we must be able to include the vast diversity of populations impacted by HIV. As you focused intensely on addressing reimbursements in the past, the same emphasis must be placed on reducing this list. Housing as healthcare. So we urge the mayor and the city council to commit to supporting, addressing, and finding solutions for the waiting list of persons living with and families living with HIV, seeking HOPWA services, including seeking partnerships throughout the 29-county metropolitan area to identify best practice and housing opportunities throughout the metro area. Second, the mayor in his recent remarks regarding the city being declared the best place to live by Money Magazine, he stated it's not enough until Atlanta is not just a city of prosperity, but a city where all can prosper. As the city moves forward with proposals from his office, and building on the streamlined HOPWA contract and reimbursement process, we encourage you and the mayor to consider working with the city council to build processes to back up what already exists, to add redundancy. In the past, it took time to it took to complete a HOPWA contract with the city often left service providers in a position where they would have to float the funds on behalf of the city at the provider's expense. These costs can total over $1 million for service providers in one fiscal year. Due to providers not being able to be reimbursed until contracts are in place, we encourage the city to create programs and processes to bear the burden of these costs so that service providers do not incur them after receiving their notice of award and await their contracts. Innovative ideas such as this, which was introduced by Councilmember Alex Wine in the last joint session. So we urge the mayor to work with the city council to create an allocation from the city's general funds to cover the interest and closing costs on loans incurred by HOPWA service providers as they wait for their contracts to be finalized.
Thank you, Mr. Ramirez, for your time.
Yes, I just want to remind you that I did send this letter out with support from 16 other city organizations to your office, Alex Wine's office, city council president, and the mayor's office. Thank you.
Thank you. Our final speaker is Ms. Henry Jordan.
Giving out to the Spirit of Christ, to everyone that's here. See now that I, even I, am he, and there is no God with me. I kill and make alive. I wound, I heal. Neither is there any that can deliver out of my hand. Deuteronomy 32nd chapter, 39th verse. The false gods are impotent. Only Yahweh can kill and make alive, wound and heal. To sin against God and boast about it is to ask for death. James Griff. Receive us, we have wronged no man. We have corrupted no man. We have defrauded no man. 2 Corinthians 7 chapter 2nd verse. When I was homeless living with my daughter, I went to this church. They had a small service for the homeless. The homeless thought they were homeless because of their sinful deeds, being a whoremonger, cheating, dishonesty, being drunk, being a drug addict, etc. This what made me ask Jesus, can you create income without deceit, defraud, mischief, lying, robbery, extortion, etc.? That created the income of over $59 billion. I noticed the people in authority didn't have this kind of mind. And Jesus came and spake unto them, saying, all power is given unto me in heaven and in earth. Matthew 28 chapter 18 verse. The Great Commission brings the first gospel to its grand finale. God gave Jesus power over Satan on earth and in heaven for our deliverance. I need deliverance to stop serving Satan. Do you? For the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Jesus Christ our Lord. Romans 6 chapter 23rd verse. Wages emphasizes what we deserve. Jesus gives us power to reap the wages that reapeth eternal life and kill the wages that reapeth death. I want this power. Do you desire this power? We can't stop Satan unless we seek to obey Christ in Jesus' name. No other name shall man be saved by but the name of Jesus Christ. Salvation in that name. And we need that salvation. I know I do.
Thank you, Ms. Jordan. I believe that was our final speaker. So that concludes the public comment portion of the agenda. So on the agenda, the next item is some presentations. However, I believe we have one communication for discussion and for a vote. And we'll, if my colleagues will indulge me, I'd like to move that communication forward as our next item. Seeing no issues. I know you'll read it in, but Ms. Fletcher, if you can come on up to the podium and if you can read in the caption.
Item number 1 is 22C5174, communication from council members Jason Winston, Amir Faroki, Byron Amos, Jason Dozier, and Michael Julian Bond, appointing Ms. Miracle Fletcher to serve as a member of the Housing Commission. This appointment is for a term of 2 years.
Ms. Fletcher, thank you for joining us today. Good to see you again.
Awesome. It's awesome to be here. Thank
Yeah.
you for having me.
Absolutely. If you could tell the committee a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in the appointment.
Just first, let me just say thank you for the opportunity to be here. My name is Miracle Fletcher. I am a native of Atlanta, Georgia. My background is in education, also mental health, but right now my platform is housing. I came here before City Council back in June to actually advocate for the Tenant Bill of Rights, which brought me here because even now in my situation, I'm in a situation of displacement. So understanding like the differences between being housed and unhoused and understanding how we are misrepresented as far as allocating funds for budgets and us having accessible resources and different things that we need in order to be able to have stable housing. So that's what brought me here. Advocating with Housing Justice League, just being here and wanting to learn more and be able to represent single mothers, because my story is very personal to me. Not understanding my rights as a HUD subsidy resident, not understanding my rights as a tenant, and not having little to no rights here as a tenant and as a renter here. It affects not only myself, but other single families, other single mothers, other low income, especially African American family members. So that's what brought me here today. So I just want the opportunity to be a part and do the best to represent for the people that need the funding.
Thank you so much. Before I open up to colleagues for comments and questions, I do want to acknowledge we've been joined by Councilmember Byron D. Amos. Councilman Winston.
Just want to thank you, Ms. Fletcher, for stepping up to serve the people of Atlanta. You've been a long-term advocate for residents at Trestle Tree, which is located in District 1. And so, I thank you for continuing this good work, and I look forward to you continuing it for years to come. I'd like to make a motion when it's appropriate.
Councilmember Amos, and then we'll take a motion.
I was going to make the motion, but I second.
All right, motion by Winston, second by Amos. Please open the vote.
The vote is open.
Motion carries 5 yeas, 0 nays. Congratulations and thank you for your service to the city of Atlanta.
Thank you. I'm so excited. I look forward to working with you all.
Absolutely. All right, back to our regular agenda. We have 3 presentations today. They're all very related into the topic of housing. First up, we have Atlanta Housing with their quarterly update. I know Dr. Grant is here, and I know Terry Lee is here with Atlanta Housing. I do want to acknowledge we've also been joined by Councilmember Michael Julian Bond.
Good afternoon. I'm Terry Lee, Chief Operating Officer for Atlanta Housing. Many of you know that I spent about 16 years with the City of Atlanta, and I think since my departure in 2020, this is possibly the first time I've been back before the council, so it's actually good to be home, and so I look forward to sharing this with you. The other thing that you may realize is that I'm not Eugene Jones. I do send his regards, but if you will allow me, I will share an update from his last presentation, which he shared with you in August. You can go to the next slide. Oh. Okay, great. So when you think about Atlanta Housing, and I want to echo the comments that Mr. Murray stated, we do need to do better, especially when we have the opportunity to maximize affordability on our land. But we've been very clear in understanding the charge from Mayor Dickens. As to quote Mayor Dickens, his hands is in our back. And he is very serious about lifting up affordability, making sure that we're serving the least of these, but also maximizing development opportunities on publicly owned land. There are 3, as we reach towards the 20,000 units for the city, for citizens here in the city of Atlanta, there are 3 efforts that the city has identified that we are a part of. One would be the Problem Properties Group, and that's really looking at properties that have some level of affordability or rental subsidy and making sure that they are in quality decent and safe sanitary conditions. The second working group would be the Neighborhood Working Group, and the Neighborhood Working Group actually captures 3 project areas within Atlanta Housing, Thomasville, Bowen Homes, as well as the old Thomasville, Bowen Homes, as well as rental properties that we have along Campbellton Road. And so we're working very closely with the mayor's office, looking at how, as we serve as a catalyst to do redevelopment opportunities on the land to encourage more housing and mixed income and mixed use opportunities, how do we also surround and protect the neighboring neighborhood and making sure that those residents are also empowered, but the conditions, the code enforcement conditions, the economic development conditions, that those are also improved. And then the last, and I'll speak about this a little later in the presentation, is the Affordable Housing Strike Force. And that's literally bringing in all publicly supported agencies, focusing on the land inventory that they have and how can we utilize or leverage that land in a very expedient fashion to move forward with affordable housing. So when we think about Atlanta Housing, and this is a slide that we show you all often, but I still think it's important to continue and keep in mind who we serve. So we've served in this last fiscal year close to 27,000 households. 45% of those households are actually elderly and or persons that are disabled. Our families don't make a lot of money. 97% of our families are making less than $21,000, and 81% of our families, well, 81% of our families are making less than $28,000, and 97% of those are making around $21,000. And so our families, we are reaching, and majority of the families that we're reaching from a very low income spectrum is through our voucher program. When you think about the Housing Choice Voucher Program, there are really two activities, and we typically talk about them separately, but I would like to combine them in buckets. So we have what we call the Housing Choice Voucher Program, which is tenant-based voucher program, but then also we have Home Flex, which is project-based. When you think about it, we have about 17,000 vouchers that we issue here within the city of Atlanta. Of those 17,000 vouchers that we issue directly in the city of Atlanta, we have about 1,500 that we call ports. Those ports are where someone started on Atlanta Housing's program and then made the determination that they wanted to move to another jurisdiction. Under HUD law, under HUD statute, that is allowable, and so we do have about 1,500 families that we're serving outside our jurisdiction. The great majority of those families are within the Atlanta metropolitan area, but it's still that number. When you see the 15 voucher holders, we previously had a program for home ownership where we would allow our participants to utilize their voucher for home ownership purposes. These 15 families, quite honestly, have exceeded the statute of limitation under HUD. HUD has a time frame that the voucher could be utilized, but we've been able to continue to work with the families because we do not want to displace anyone. And so that's the reason why you would see that low number. Of the 9,500 families that we serve, we are seeing a large number of our voucher participants south of I-20. One of the things that we've done to encourage voucher utilization across the city is we've adjusted our payment standards. We've also streamlined some of our inspection processes, and due to COVID, we've used technology to improve a lot of our intake processes, working with landlords. We've had conversations with the apartment association as to how we could encourage their property owners or their members to accept more of our voucher participants. And we're thankful for the city council resolution that is also encouraging landlords that are not receiving any level of voucher assistance but are receiving public dollars to require and accept our participants. When we think about our Home Flex program, this is Atlanta Housing's opportunity to incentivize the private market to provide some level of rental assistance to our families. So project-based, Home Flex is simply project-based rental assistance. And so the tenant-based voucher actually rests with the individual. Under the Home Flex program, the project-based voucher rests with the property. And so we have about 117 properties across the city that we incentivize, which actually create about 6,500 units. Those contracts usually range from 15 to 20 years. If you followed our board meetings, you see that we've done a lot of renewals. We really encourage our property owners to stay on the program so that we do not lose affordability. Specifically, if a property has an expiring tax credit, that's when we see most property owners want to convert to market, but we've been working very intentional about making sure we keep our properties on our program. Our down payment assistance program. So we talked a little bit about the 15 vouchers that were remaining under the Section 8, the Housing Choice Voucher Program. What we've transitioned to is what we call now down payment assistance. And we encourage our participants as well as city employees and just the larger community to really take advantage of our program. What we're finding is that we've invested since 2018 about $25 million in down payment assistance to impact about 1,200 families. Just in this last fiscal year, we did about 221 loans, totaling about a $4.8 million investment. You'll notice that 20,000 is available for eligible home buyers, but 25,000 is available for voucher participants, our veterans, education, healthcare, and public safety professionals. We recently participated in a public safety event, and we had an opportunity to meet Lieutenant Holmes, who is one of our participants from our down payment assistance program. And back in 2017, he was sharing with us that but for our program, he would not have been able to buy a 3-bedroom bungalow in the Sylvan Hills community. Now, you may have conversations with Invest Atlanta about their down payment assistance program. I will tell you, because of the market we serve, the high-cost market, that many of our participants layer the funding through Invest Atlanta as well as the City of Atlanta. So real estate plan development. So one of the elephants in the room oftentimes, and probably not an elephant because I think it's very vocal now, are the number of acres that Atlanta Housing actually owns. And so when you think about the acreage that Atlanta Housing owns, we have about 550 acres of land that can be purposed for some level of redevelopment activity. What you have before you would be a chart that identifies close to 300 acres of land in 3 different tiers. The first tier would be land that's active with a development. The second would be planning and development activity underway. And then the third tier, which is number 14, would be a site that's under due diligence. It's about 213 acres that we're still looking to move towards. Our priority right now, though, is to lift up properties that are active with a developer and make sure that we can move those projects forward. A great example of a property that we need to move forward, and Mr. Murray was very vocal and quite honestly instrumental in having the Housing Authority and our development partner really include the community in a different way, would be Inglewood. Inglewood is a project that a developer was selected on Inglewood, I believe, back in 2015, 2016, and that's a project that we're working to move forward. We should be breaking ground on infrastructure improvements early next year. Another example of that would be Mechanicsville, the old McDaniel Glen. What we're looking at, you've seen many of the rental phases, and we're working along with Columbia Residential to address the conditions of those properties. But what's really exciting is the fact that we have an opportunity to do home ownership on the remaining 8 acres. And so working along with Columbia Residential and SUMAC is our desire to break ground hopefully in no later than March of next year. Just this last week in late October, we went before the community to talk and to present the project to them. We went before the Mechanicsville Community Association, and we met with the executive leadership team of the neighborhood to just address concerns that they have about the project, because it has been a project that's been on the books for quite some time, so we are moving it forward. We are committed to going back to the community and as well as meeting with the council member as Columbia and SUMAC develop their plans and moving that project forward. You will also notice that Bowen Homes and Civic Center are actually listed under Tier 2, which says planning and development underway. The reason being, while our board in, I believe, August as well as October approved both particular projects, we have not signed master development agreements. And so until we sign a master development agreement on those efforts, we still have them under Tier 2, but we're moving forward pretty quickly on those projects to get us to the point where we can move. Now, when I talk about the remaining acres, just to give you a sense of some of that acreage that quite honestly is either under due diligence or we have not identified plans for, one great example of that will be Lila Valley, as well as Jonesboro Road North and South. So those are some examples of properties that we have that currently there are not active plans on. We have received interest from the property owners and developers who would like to purchase those properties, but our interest is making sure we get the properties redeveloped for affordable housing and long-term affordable housing. Our co-investment program was really a unique program that the Housing Authority created back in 2019, and it was a $60 million investment that was really partnered with Invest Atlanta and the Beltline, where the Housing Authority would come in, make a capital loan to the project, but also retain some level of ownership. This program to date, we've invested probably close to $50 million of our dollars, and Invest Atlanta has leveraged over $150 million of their funding in order to make this move forward. A great example is the 360 Peachtree Street project with Atlanta First United Methodist. But for the co-investment fund, Atlanta Housing would not have been able to help meet the gap in that effort. This is and as our HUD representatives tell us, this is probably a one-of-a-kind program that we're doing to move forward and to move forward quickly in trying to incentivize affordable housing. So when we think about stronger neighborhoods, the opportunity, and I spoke a little bit about the mayor's efforts on neighborhoods, but the opportunity that Atlanta Housing has in focusing on neighborhoods, quite honestly, is different from the previous Hope 6 model, where we focused on just the redevelopment of the former public housing site. HUD now has a program that is called Choice Neighborhood. It's the Choice Neighborhood program. And under Choice Neighborhood, you have both a planning grant and an implementation grant. We were successful in 2015 with the city as a co-applicant in receiving a Choice Neighborhood implementation grant of $30 million for University Homes. You may all know that University Homes was the first public housing for Black people in the state of Georgia as well as in this country. And so the opportunity to redevelop University Homes, but to connect it to the neighborhoods, I think is really critical and important, because many of the neighbors and the residents felt sort of closed off from the universities, from the AU Center schools. And so to date, our development partner for University Homes is Integral. To date, we have literally three projects that are underway, and the fourth one will be planned in 2023. Those 4 projects are really the rental opportunities. In 2015 and 2019, we completed Oasis at Scholars Landing, as well as Ashley 1AB at Scholars Landing, creating Oasis at Scholars Landing is 100% affordable because it is senior housing. We're looking at about 108 units of affordable housing at Ashley 1AB. Ashley 1C, Ashley 2, and our home ownership phase are either under construction or in the planning phase, but we will have all housing built out on site no later than 2025. When we think about it from a rental perspective, by 2024, we'll have about 479 rental units at the University Homes campus, and 332 of those units will be affordable. We're also looking at a home ownership component. Of the homeownership component, we're looking at about a 20% affordable homeownership rate, where we're doing both townhomes and condos, working along with Integral, and the total unit count is about 76. What's really important, though, about the University Homes was really the partnership with the city and Invest Atlanta, because the Housing Authority would not have been able to accomplish what's been done at University Homes without that partnership, and quite honestly, without the city serving as a co-applicant. We were able to take $30 million and leverage it with about $459 million of projects through the City of Atlanta and Invest Atlanta, as well as many of our other partners. I want to thank Councilmember Dozier, as well as others who participated in our historical marker celebration. We had one for Centennial Homes, and then we had a second one at Roosevelt Hall, which is before you. Roosevelt Hall is the only remaining original building on the old University Home site. And back in those days, the community actually used Roosevelt Hall as a meeting place, and they utilized Roosevelt Hall to even hold some of their galas. And what we heard from the community is that they no longer had a community spot, and the community wanted that investment. So Atlanta Housing made the determination, along with our development partner, that Atlanta Housing would retain ownership of Roosevelt Hall and to revitalize it into a usable building for the community. That building now is a $10 million investment. We also received funding from the City of Atlanta through their CDBG funds to help utilize Roosevelt Hall and to make sure that it is a space and a venue for the community. We're planning now for construction to be complete, hopefully no later than the end of November. One of the things that we're looking to do also is to have a retail space in Roosevelt Hall, which will be a coffee shop for the neighboring community as well as the students. So the reason why it's critically important to talk about University Homes is because we have Bowen Homes coming up. And Atlanta Housing received a planning grant for the Bowen Homes, the former Bowen Home site, back in November of 2020, and that was a $450,000 planning grant. We've been working with the community for quite some time, making sure that we move forward with that effort. We've received tremendous support from Councilmember Hillis under the planning grant as well. Well, back in October, HUD made an announcement that they would actually release a NOFA for Choice Neighborhood Implementation Grant for up to $50 million. We believe that Bowen Homes is a perfect opportunity for us to move forward, planning with the community for the redevelopment of that site as well as the neighborhood. We'll be coming back to the City Council through the Mayor's office with legislation requesting that the City Council approve the City of Atlanta to serve as our co-applicant in the Bowen Homes application, as well as for the city to serve as the neighborhood lead. Under the Choice Neighborhood Program, you have people housing neighborhoods. The people in the housing component will be led by Atlanta Housing. The neighborhood component will be led by the City of Atlanta. So we are excited about that opportunity. We're excited about the chance to really transform that community with the neighbors to make sure that we are planning with and not on top of folks who have dwelled in their community for so long. Now, Let's talk a little bit about what was approved by our board back in October. So in October, our board approved a development strategy to move forward with the redevelopment of the site itself. That development strategy approved about 2,000 units with only 27% affordable. I say only 27% affordable because we're working now with the development team to increase the level of affordability on the Bowen Home site. We've done something different, our last two offerings, the Civic Center as well as Bowen Homes, and we've actually had City of Atlanta, our partners either from Invest Atlanta or the Beltline, as well as a community representative serve on the RFP review committee. And so we are making sure that we keep the community involved and engaged, but we have heard some concerns about the affordability mix, so we're working with the development partner to increase the affordability on this particular project. And so the site itself will be a mixed income and mixed use site. We're looking again to have about 2,000 units. Close to about 538 of those units will be for affordable housing purposes as planned and approved by the board today. When we come back before you for the next quarterly presentation, those numbers for affordability may very well be higher. But I did want to just share with you what the board actually approved. Of the 538 units that were approved, a portion of those will be for homeownership purposes. Now, when we talk about income ranges, we're looking from 0 to 80%. For income. And so that 0 captures folks at 30, 60, 50, 30, 50, 60% of AMI. And I've shared with you when you look at it from the standpoint of the families that we actually serve. 250 of the units will be for age-assisted households, and they will also be made available for families who would like to come back. And I should have started with that. The families that lived at Bowen Homes at the time of the demolition of the property were issued vouchers. They have an opportunity to come back. Mr. Dozier recognized Dr. Grant early on. Dr. Grant and his team, along with Tricia Connell and her team, are working to make sure that we keep the residents, the former residents, abreast, and that we keep them engaged. And if they choose to come back to the Bowen Home site, that we make that a possibility. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to come back home, and I want to thank you for the opportunity to share with you the latest quarterly update for Atlanta Housing. And if you have any questions, I will entertain them at this time.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Before we go into the questions, I do want to knock out two administrative items. One, I want to acknowledge my colleague, Councilmember Liliana Bakhtiari, who has joined us. And secondly, I thought we were done with communications earlier, and it was brought to my attention that Sergeant Thomas, you're here with us today. So after we're done with this particular Q&A, we'll go into your communication and go back in the presentation. So stick with us for a little bit longer. With that being said, I will open the door on questions, because I see there's a few colleagues that are wanting to ask questions as well. But my first one is with regards to the home ownership programs that Atlanta Housing is pursuing, recognizing that there's a down payment assistance program, recognizing that both in Mechanicsville and Bowen Homes and many of other communities, home ownership is a big focus area for the authority. My first question with regards to home ownership is, how do home ownership opportunities get presented back before the community? Because I wonder if there's an opportunity, like let's say the McDaniel Glen projects, for instance, if y'all are looking at building new homes for ownership opportunities for residents in that community, I would think as we look at ways to stabilize the community, maybe giving existing Columbia Mechanicsville tenants maybe first right of refusal or first access to those housing opportunities so that you can better stabilize the neighborhood so they transition not from Mechanicsville over to Bowen Homes, but from Mechanicsville to Mechanicsville because their kids are in school. So just thinking about, so that's more of a common question, my apologies. Yeah. But I guess is Atlanta Housing thinking in those terms when it comes to presenting these opportunities, number one. And number two, with the down payment assistance program, has the amount of money that y'all have set aside for that program kept pace with the cost of real estate that we've seen skyrocket in the last couple of years? Because if it's the same amount per year on the down payment assistance standpoint, that $1 or $2 million that you might have set aside may not be worth as much in the context of the increasing valuations of homes. So can you speak to that a little?
Yeah, I can. So let me answer the first question. So under the leadership of Dee Dee Beatty and Pat Evans, who actually lead our real estate operations and our homeownership team, this fiscal year, we're making a very intentional effort to work with our voucher participants, and that's our voucher participants under the Housing Choice tenant-based program, as well as HomeFlex, which is project-based rental assistance, and to really get them ready for homeownership. And so in the past, we have what we call the 5-star program, where we've graduated our Housing Choice participants. We're now expanding that to include residents who live at properties such as the Columbia properties in Mechanicsville to also be able to participate. So that is one of the homeownership initiatives that we're working on. Now it is in the planning stages, but we are working on that. So when you think about our allocation, we allocate probably, I think we started out allocating close to about $2.5 million for this particular program. That has graduated or elevated to $5 million in the last 2 fiscal years. And it's done so because we've received, one, people need help. People need help in purchasing properties here within the city of Atlanta. And again, our program is not a standalone. It has been layered with so many other programs in order to buy down the house for that a buyer who is at 50% of AMI, 6% of AMI, can actually afford to purchase a home. Now, one of the things that we have done is we've increased our purchase price because as prices have escalated in the city of Atlanta, we wanted to make sure that our purchase price was equivalent or close to what we're seeing on the market. So we have made some adjustments, but the key really is working with our partners and making sure that as much as possible that we can take advantage of every resource that's available to make a person a homeowner.
Oh, I appreciate that answer. And I think that segues a little bit into my next question, because as you were talking about the vacant land pipeline, this is where I remind the general public, I was a humanities major, so my math may not be 100%, but trying to get a sense of, number one, the number of units that y'all are putting on per acre from like number of unit per acre standpoint, and number two, kind of whispering with my colleague to my left, the percentage of affordable units per site, and getting a sense of kind of really the diversity of projects that y'all have across the city. But I was curious, number one, with going back to the Mechanicsville example, it's about 20% of the units are going to be affordable. Can you talk through why that is that low, considering some of these other projects are looking at 70 or 80% of units are affordable?
So I'm happy to have your support, because I just shared with our team that we need to increase the affordability on the Mechanicsville homeownership project, because 20% affordability is entirely too low when you look at a project that's being completed on land owned or contributed by the housing authority. So we do need to increase that percentage, and we look forward to working with you and the community. Across the 2 tiers, though, I think we're averaging right around 45% affordability. When we look at properties that are already actively engaged with a developer, we do have, I think that's averaging 60%, with the exception of the example of the McDaniel Glen site. So we will work with the development partner and the community. I will tell you, though, we have heard from your community that, okay, so you know what I've heard.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I have this debate regularly with my community, because I'm a big believer that if we don't build more new affordability or preserve affordability where it exists, and I mean, we're losing a number of affordable, naturally affordable housing. We're losing folks that were taking vouchers that are now their landlords are making different decisions.
That's right.
And so even though, yes, we have a relatively large concentration of affordable units in the neighborhood, in aggregate, that we're losing units at a net level, and I think that oftentimes that bigger picture gets lost in that conversation. So I'm like, more affordable units, we're still bringing, so that's, I guess, where my other question.
And again, I want to say we appreciate your support.
Yes.
Because we do need to increase that number more than just 27 units. We definitely need to increase it, which would possibly cause an amendment to the master development agreement, but that's fine, as long as we're doing an amendment to increase affordability. And quite honestly, I'm not looking to get to that higher tier of 80% of AMI.
Yeah.
We need to make sure that we increase affordability for folks who are really at the lower end of the spectrum, but can afford, that can participate in sustainability of a home ownership opportunity.
At the end of the day, I'm willing to spend political capital to make Atlanta more affordable. So
thank you. We appreciate that, sir.
I will ask, just kind of with the part 2 of that question, looking at the density, recognize Mechanicsville is a it's a downtown community. I can see skyscrapers from my front yard. For general public's awareness, I live in Mechanicsville, so I'm very familiar with these sites. And looking at the number of units per acre, I see, for instance, for a Tier 2 plan for North Avenue, you're looking at 84 units per acre, Civic Center 69 units per acre. But then when you get to Mechanicsville, it's only 16 and a half units per acre. So, it's a downtown community, and I know especially when you talk about communities that are in need of retail, commercial, and those sorts of investments, businesses chase rooftops. So getting more people in the community helps ensure that those businesses can be successful. I'm just curious if you can talk through maybe why the density level is so low compared to maybe some other sites that y'all have identified.
Yeah. So it really also depends on what the neighborhood would like to see. And what we've heard in Mechanicsville is, of course, single family as well as detached. Single family and attached townhomes. And so that may be some of the things, the issues and concerns with density. We can have a larger conversation with you in reference to, the desire of yourself as well aligned with the community as to what the current plans are, and if there's an opportunity to make any adjustments to those plans.
Definitely more to follow, because I would love to
Yeah.
dig in a little bit more. And I know with this,
I'll take the responsibility to schedule that meeting
Okay.
with Sumac, yourself, Columbia, and our team.
and I know and thank you for that.
Yes, sir.
With and from my understanding, this this next phase for McDaniel Glen is not, I believe there's other properties that Atlanta Housing owns across the neighborhood that aren't part of this particular. We can talk more about the details. I don't want to get too much in the weeds, because I know we're very much so. I just have one more question. This is a conversation I had with the compliance team with Invest Atlanta just yesterday. But I think what will be helpful for us as council members, if you have, whether it's a master list or something that you can share with us that highlights all of the properties that y'all either manage or have subcontracted or have agreements with across our districts. Because when we get calls from constituents about property managers not picking up trash, elevators are not working the way they're supposed to, bed bugs, any sort of quality of life issues, I recognize that many of the apartment complexes in my district, some are privately owned and managed, even maybe natural affordable, and not have anything to do with Atlanta Housing or Invest Atlanta. Some have received funding through one of your programs to, and thus there's an oversight component there. But it's hard to figure out where everything is. So when I get a call, I just want to know who to reach out to ensure that it's addressed.
So absolutely. So two things. One, Councilmember Bakhtari had also made that request. And so we are finalizing those documents to be able to share with City Council. But we're also, under the leadership of our board, creating a digital platform. So at any point in time, you can go to a website and literally look to see where properties actually rest. And not just properties rest, but also be able to track our development activity and the number of families we served and in what income levels we serve. It's similar to the housing affordability tracker that the city created, but it will be expanded to kind of capture some of the unique areas of focus that Atlanta Housing has. So we'll make sure you have that information.
Thank you so much.
No, thank you.
That was my last question. Sorry, y'all.
I'm gonna have to tell Mr. Jones the number of questions, because I watch his presentations. And I see the number of questions.
No worries with that.
Okay, thank you, sir.
All right. Next is Councilmember Jason Winston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here, Ms. Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Winston.
I'm going to channel a little bit of Chair Dozier here today, so I apologize for some of the same questions, but he was kind of thinking on kind of the same front as I was. So when I look at the number of affordable units, to me, I'm really trying to figure out what's the methodology here, what's the formula, like how are we coming up with the number of affordable units by project? Because there doesn't seem to be a standard, and I think it makes it difficult for us to be able to explain these projects to our constituents. I look at 50% of Herndon is affordable housing. I look at Inglewood, it's 2/3. I look at Bowen Home, it's 25%. Thomasville is 50%. And so it makes it difficult to explain what the standard is, what's Atlanta Housing Authority's mission and goal. And I think if there was some type of standard, you articulated it at 45% was kind of the average there. But, I don't really understand it. So I just want to
Yeah.
know kind of internally how are we coming up with these numbers?
Yeah, so under the leadership of our board as well as our CEO, we're in the process of developing our new strategic plan. That strategic plan, we hope to launch it early next year, but that strategic plan will give more of guiding principles as to how we are literally looking at affordability, what we're requiring affordability across projects. Many of the projects that you see before you in Tier 1, quite honestly, are projects that have been on the drawing board probably dating back to 2014, 2015. And so I can't speak to the actual mechanics, but what I can tell you is that in looking at affordability, we also look at what the market can bear. And some of these projects may have taken the market in consideration as well as what the desire of the community was at that time.
Okay. You know, just a suggestion for me would be, you know, we could tier this, you know, say, hey, here's our goal is to get to a certain amount of affordable units. And if we don't, then it drops into a different tier bucket that says, hey, this is our goal from there. And so.
And that's what I believe you will see with our strategic plan. I'm not the person to release and introduce the strategic plan to you, but I will tell you, you will see a very strong focus on transparency as well as how we plan to reach affordability, but also how we plan to assist and align ourselves to help the mayor meet the goal of 20,000 units.
Okay. Yeah, it just makes it easy to explain. I mean, I've got a couple of projects that are in my district, and you know, one seems to have a set of goals versus another, and it makes it hard when you're explaining those to the various constituents. The other question I had was about the down payment assistance program. I just wanted to know if you could talk a little bit more about the process, specifically as it relates to veterans, you know, education, people in the education field, healthcare, public safety officials, about how they can, you know, dip into this pool of money that's available.
Yeah. So first I want to, on the rental side, I want to thank you for your guidance and your help in moving forward with the Inglewood project. We still have a long way to go because we have two developers on that site, the Michaels organization as well as the Benoit Group, but we are seeing progress and we're moving. So I want to thank you for your assistance with that effort. Under the down payment assistance program, and I actually believe that the down payment assistance program is probably one of Atlanta Housing's best kept secrets because we literally are serving a large amount of families with a 3-person staff. And so we have a relationship with several lending institutions. Typically, we also do home buyer fairs or community clinics so that we can make sure that information is made available to individuals that are interested in applying for down payment assistance programs. I was just approached here at the city about, as I was coming to this meeting, about possibly holding a lunch and learn for city employees to educate them on our down payment assistance programs as well. But we provide direct community clinics. We participate in home buyer fairs. We make sure that our information is layered with Invest Atlanta's information because we have so many of the same participants while we may have some different lenders. And we also make sure we cultivate the relationship with our lenders so that they're familiar with the program, the requirements, but also the information as they get potential buyers in.
Is there a minimum max on the purchase price of a home?
Yeah, the maximum purchase price, if I'm not mistaken, is right around $388,000.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being here.
No, thank you, sir.
Hey, Councilmember Winston. Councilmember Hillis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and sorry to beat a dead horse. I think we've all been doing the same type of math up here, and all have all the same notes written on that. They were looking at my notes. That's what happened.
And let me be clear. That's why we put it out here. So this level of transparency, we're basically telling you who we are, what we're doing, and how we're impacting. So please, I welcome the questions, but this is information, quite honestly, that you've been asking for quite some time. And so we want to make sure that the city council, the city, and all of our partners are aware of our activities and what we're actually doing.
Thank you for that. But a lot of what I was going to say has been said, looking at the different levels of affordability kind of all over the board, but staying in my lane and looking at the District 9 projects. We've got some here that looking at Tier 2 from 40 to 60% of AMI, and then we've got the elephant in the room of Bowen Homes, literally and figuratively, because it is the biggest piece of land that AHA has, by far the largest amount of units, at only that 27% of affordable units. So number one, as has already been said, and you have acknowledged, we really have to get that level up and far up from 27%. And that's the overarching message, but then also I'm big on not just affordable units, but also being able to provide home ownership in that affordable range. And right now, as the numbers work out, we're only doing 36 ownership units in the 80 or below AMI, which is about 1.8% of the total units on that project. So would love to see, those numbers up to be able to provide those affordable home ownership opportunities to increase that level. So we've got some work to do. I know the timeline, we're looking at the MDA, I believe, in summer of next year. So definitely want to, whether we need to get together and talk, with the mayor's office or whoever needs to be involved in that, I would love to be involved because, as you mentioned, I've been a big partner and have been pounding the table about Bowen Homes and getting that development, that blank piece of land up and activated for some time. So,
And if we have not done so, I apologize, but we do need to schedule an update meeting with you on Bowen Homes as well as the Choice Neighborhood implementation application.
man,
So
let's
we will
please
do that.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Councilmember Bakhtiari.
I'm going to give Ms. Lee a second to finish her notes. Go ahead.
No, please.
As it was already said, a lot of questions have already been answered. And for the record, I think Councilmember Hillis was stealing from the chairman, but that's just my opinion. But one of the questions I had, and forgive me if these are ridiculous or have already been asked. I was just curious. One was the household, the 3,227 households serving those with disabilities. Would you define what is encompassed under the term disability?
So it would be a person who has either a physical and/or mental.
And/or it's a mental.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Physical and/or mental disability.
Okay.
And what I didn't say when I talked about this is we do partner with Partners for Home in providing vouchers for persons who were formerly homeless as well.
Yes. So that actually follows up on some of my questions because one of the things I've been working on at the city is how we define disability because it's not always inclusive of people who might be dealing with mental health disabilities. So I just wanted to check on that, which also kind of brings me to my next question. In terms of supportive housing, you mentioned working with Partners for Home. Obviously, one of the issues that we have is we can fund all the outreach teams that we want, but if we have nowhere to place people who need to be put into housing to move them out of the street or out of being dealing with housing instability, et cetera, we need places to put them. And I was curious about the supportive housing projects that AHA currently has.
Yeah, so one that actually just received, I believe, is clearance from Atlanta Housing is Covenant House. And so that's a great example of a partnership that we've done with Partners for Home, as well as other financial institutions to be able to lift up supportive housing. And so typically our tenant-based voucher, we have, and I may quote the number wrong, but I believe we've allocated a pool of about 512 vouchers.
I believe that's the exactly correct number.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Through our program, but we also, to Partners for Home, but we also have what we call emergency housing vouchers that we received from HUD during COVID. And that's in excess of about 200 vouchers that we also have allocated to Partners for Home. And so we literally, those vouchers stay there. So as a participant leaves the program or is no longer eligible for a voucher, that voucher stays with Partners for Home.
And I failed to also thank you at the beginning of this for your assistance in supporting the housing voucher legislation and dedication to that. I can't thank you enough. I can't thank AHA enough for being a leading example on that. It's going to.
Thank you.
I'm certain to gain
and thank you for your leadership. That is something that we've had tried to do for quite some time. So we do thank you for your leadership because it's important. You know, we have vouchers that are expiring and we don't tell somebody, well, just because you can find a unit that we're going to take your voucher, because in this market, we know the 1 and 2 bedroom units are just very hard to find. But if we had more partners being willing to accept our vouchers, our voucher participants, it would be very helpful. So thank you so much.
No, thank you. I would be nothing without my team and without my colleagues on that one. And I was also wondering, is AHA open to doing a partnership? I know housing is a piece, but for example, in the Sweet Auburn corridor, maybe looking at some of the properties to do a navigation center or things of that, because obviously we don't build housing fast enough, and that's an issue, but in terms of still connecting people to resources, could that be a potential partnership that AHA would be open with? Too?
Yeah,
I know I looked at the vacant land list, and I know that we have some in District 5, and that's tier 1, tier 2, that's different. But I would love to sit down and, just like Councilmember Dozier said, that's probably getting into the weeds and we need to have a meeting offline. But I was curious if that was something that you all would be open to.
Yeah, we're open to moving forward affordable housing and any type of activity that would improve or create a public benefit. I do believe the properties that you may be speaking of in the Auburn area are actually already committed to a development partner. It would be integral. But we definitely want to sit down and speak with you about just properties that we own, but quite honestly, just opportunities to partner.
Thank you, because when we talk about housing, of course, it's always about building units, but the affordable housing conversation is obviously a lot bigger than that, right? So it's
That's right.
a number of things, energy burden, et cetera. So I look forward to that conversation. And the last question I kind of already touched on a little bit. Could the larger AHA developments incorporate permanent supportive housing and transitional housing facilities too? I mean, we kind of touched on this already, but
Yeah,
is
yeah,
that something that we're looking into?
we would be open to having conversations. What would be helpful with that is just a financing model, and having the homeless opportunity bond or the housing opportunity bond be able to dedicate a resource for permanent supportive housing. I know in the last housing opportunity bond, we did a set aside, and so we will be interested in being able to leverage that resource to be able to do so. One of the things that we're really looking at is understanding what affordability costs, so that we can make sure that as we're pushing for more affordability, we're also layering it with resources to be able to achieve it.
That's awesome. And so Housing Commission, we have a new piece to work on. Andy, you down? Okay.
Yeah. And I'm a member of the Housing Commission.
There you go. So perfect. And the only other thing I wanted to ask, the very last thing is, a lot of the constituents I speak with are always confused about AMI. So could you kind of discuss what the average income is now for 80% AMI now by with inflation?
Yeah, so the average income, if I'm not mistaken, for a person, a family, or single person household at 80% of AMI is probably around $45,000. I think when you look at the median income, that median income may be close to 75 or 80,000. I will say though, and I understood it, but I didn't quite appreciate it till I transitioned to Atlanta Housing. And I saw the number of families that we were serving and the income levels of our families we serve. You have to keep in mind that the AMI covers a 21-22 county area. And so while we have to use that from a HUD standard, so many of our families right here in the city of Atlanta at 80% of AMI are far less than that $45,000. And even at the median income, they're less than that median income. And so what's important is, as we do projects, that although we're using the HUD standard, that we still be intentional of targeting at deeper levels of affordability so that we can really meet the need here in the city of Atlanta.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bakhtiari. Councilmember Bond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. It's always great to see Terry Lee.
Thank you, sir.
I just have a couple of questions. I know that I'm fascinated by the home buying option that you presented in your presentation and would be eager to see it expanded. You mentioned the housing bond. Has there been any real discussions about trying to put together another housing bond in the foreseeable future?
Yeah, so the conversations I'm aware of is how we push the allocation that was made back in December of 2021, I believe, how we really move forward and push that allocation. And so a lot of emphasis has been around that. I will tell you, we've been having conversations about the infrastructure needs, because as we talk about the population or repopulating the acreage that Atlanta Housing has, it also is a significant infrastructure cost with that. And in previous times, the city was able to utilize either TAD dollars, funding from Watershed, or the Quality of Life Bond to be able to lift up infrastructure. In the first Housing Opportunity Bond, there was a set aside, and that was back in 2007, there was a set aside for Atlanta Housing to address the infrastructure needs at Collegetown at Harris Homes. So that's one of the things that we're really sort of beating heavy on, because we recognize that we have significant infrastructure costs. For example, at Inglewood, I want to say the infrastructure costs for the redevelopment of that site is upwards of $30 to $40 million. And so we're really looking to see how we can attract more resources for infrastructure so we can use our dollars for the vertical construction piece.
Well, you're on the joint commission, right, between all the agencies. I just humbly would suggest that you all come up with a bulleted list of those things that have worked in the past, so that we get to the point again to issuing the bond, that all of that will be wrapped up and taken care of, and will be standard for our sister agencies going forward.
Absolutely.
But I mentioned the bond because I don't know if anyone else is aware of what Bank of America is doing with these non-down payment mortgages. They're experimenting in I think 4 cities around the country. I was disappointed that they didn't select Atlanta, given the issues that we have here in the metropolitan area with the income differential. But they're experimenting with a type of mortgage where you don't need a down payment or pay closing costs. And so I'd urge you to take a look at that as we, I guess, at a more deliberate pace, work towards a bonding mechanism to fund something like that. Because it is great that we've been invested in trying to help people have the down payment assistance, but I think it'd be better if we had a revolving loan fund where people didn't need a down payment assistance at all and could just kind of move in and start living.
Oh, absolutely.
Start paying for it. But the second question I wanted to ask is, nobody is making manufacturing land within the boundaries of the city of Atlanta anymore. So all of the land that all the public entities hold is precious. And so as AHA is developing these plans on site, is there an overriding vision for the amount of density, or other than the mayor has stated goal of obviously 20,000, affordable units. So are you all looking at all of the property in that regard, about trying to match that density for your particular share, or are you also eyeing any of the properties that you may want to try to obtain? What's going on in that direction?
Yeah, so a couple of things. One, I do want to back up to the initiative with Bank of America. We are partnering with Wells Fargo. The Community Foundation of Atlanta has pulled together various entities to really move forward with an effort focused on improving and increasing home ownership opportunities in the BIPOC community. I believe that effort is probably over a $200 million effort through the Community Foundation. So we are moving forward with that. The announcement was made, if I'm not mistaken, on October 27th at Morehouse. And so I'm not familiar with Bank of America. I will be. And we will also try to understand why they didn't choose Atlanta as a market. And if it's an opportunity to expand, we would want them to consider Atlanta. Now, in regards to density, we want as much density as we can, because we recognize affordability will only be achieved through density. Now, the question is whether or not, one, the zoning allows it, and if it doesn't, let's go through the rezoning process, but also will the community support it? But we are, and I'm going back to my planning days, as we were trying to move forward with Atlanta City Design, and the conversation of density would come up often. I do believe that one of the best ways to achieve affordability in this city is to be denser. And so as much as we can push it on land that is owned and controlled by Atlanta Housing or any public agency, that's what we'll do.
Okay. My last point of questioning is, one, I want to give Dr. Grant some kudos. He helped me with an issue with an individual who had a housing voucher, was a single father, had a daughter, couldn't find anybody that would take him in. He went to one place over District 3. He applied, they said they'd call him back. Then they found out that he never heard from them, but they were charging AHA for his voucher for about 8 or 9 months. And Dr. Grant got him.
That's a problem.
Yeah, that's a huge problem. So I guess I want to ask, how are you all following up and checking behind folks that are claiming that they've got vouchers, or voucher clients in hand? How are you handling and managing that?
So let me give kudos to Dr. Grant and his team, because there are so many families that we get calls from every day, not just voucher participants who are looking to find housing in the city of Atlanta. And so Howard is able to work with so many of our team members to help make that a possibility, and as well as our partners. And so I want to thank him for that. But I will tell you, one of the things, and I want to look at this specific case myself, so I thank you for mentioning it. But one of the things that we have been challenged with is we were in a COVID environment. And in a COVID environment, most of our recertifications went to virtual. And so if you're doing a virtual recertification, you're not physically looking at the unit. We are slowly transitioning back to and ramping up our physical inspections. And that's where you would catch that level of a problem doing the annual reinspection process, or quite honestly, if there's a change in the voucher. But it is an opportunity for us to look at our quality controls. Dr. Grant has an investigative unit that Felicia Meadows actually leads it, that investigates issues such as this. So this is something I want to look into as well.
But the story kind of have happy in it, because his voucher, as you mentioned, in answer to some of the other questions, he was able to get his voucher renewed.
Good.
Still on the hunt. So is HUD going to do anything about making the acceptance of a voucher compulsory at some time in the future? Because as long as it's a choice, people, a lot of people, as long as people have the ability to say no, it just becomes more daunting for the person that has the voucher.
Yeah, from a national housing policy perspective, I'm not sure or aware that HUD is looking to move in that direction. I will tell you from a state perspective, and federal law, of course, will supersede state, but from a state perspective, we do not have any level of source of income protections. I'm looking forward to working with the council member and many of you as we implement the resolution that's being passed and encourage property owners to accept. But one of the first steps would probably be getting to change at a state level if the federal government is not looking to move forward.
Right, because we already do that with the properties we control.
Yes.
It's an issue. Well, okay. Well, I won't belabor it, but thank you, Terry. It's always great to see you.
Thank you, sir.
Here, I withdraw.
Hey, Councilman Bond. Councilman Westmoreland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon, sir.
3 points. I'm going to make them in 30 seconds. One, I want to echo but not belabor every comment that's been made up here, and frankly, that you have made. We have to get more dense. We absolutely have to get more dense on city-owned land. Second, I was going to ask you to talk about something you already have a little bit, the infrastructure piece, to the extent you want to add any more on that topic, just to kind of keep it front of mind for us and anybody watching now or this video in the future. And then the third is a request, and that is everybody, almost everybody, wants affordability numbers to go up and to deepen. And as we talk about that at everyone's various projects, could y'all show us like literally what that would look like and then what the cost is to get there? So if we take Bowen, since it's been a popular topic today, like to get from 538 units to way more than that and to go deeper into 60 and below, like what is it literally going to cost? And then who are the different people who could conceivably help cover that cost? So that we literally are dealing with numbers and can figure out how to move that ball forward.
Got it. And so that literally is an exercise that we're currently doing on Bowen, looking at the fact that we're at 27% and what is that scale to get to 40% affordability and what that costs. And so we'll be in a position to have that conversation pretty soon. I think we have a final discussion on Thursday. The team, rather, has a final discussion on Thursday in reference to that, because it is important, right, to push affordability, and the opportunity to push affordability on land that's owned by the Housing Authority really needs to be the first place we start. So we are looking at that. In regards, I want to make sure I have all your questions. So the first question, the point rather, was on affordability and density, and I wholeheartedly agree. I think I missed the second one though, sir.
Infrastructure, just anything else you want to talk about?
I don't know how I missed that, I'm sorry. So what we've looked at in looking at the infrastructure deals that we're currently moving forward with, we believe that the infrastructure cost is about $1 million per acre to do infrastructure. So if you just look at the 287 acres that I've shared with you, I believe on slide 6, that 287 acres very well could be upwards of $250+ million to do infrastructure. The more Atlanta Housing has to invest its resources in infrastructure where there's no return, the less funding we have available for project-based rental assistance as well as capital investment in order to go vertical. And so we are working very closely with the mayor's office and really being able to articulate what that need is and how we can move forward. But we are estimating about $1 million per acre. No, thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Westmoreland. Just my last question before we close. And I have a comment right after that. Just going back to the Bowen Homes conversation, something that stuck out to me in the conversation around Bowen Homes, and was actually with a few of these other projects, are how far some of these sites are from our city center, and recognizing that a lot of our populations that live in these developments are don't own or don't have access to a car, are transit dependent or transit reliant. When y'all are identifying sites for redevelopment, do y'all talk with MARTA to identify opportunities for expansion of whether it's bus routes or some of these other projects, whether it's BRT or even proximity or access to some of the heavy rail routes to allow for residents to be able to better access our city? Or I'm just curious kind of what that.
Yeah, so we're beginning, we've always talked to MARTA, but we're beginning to have more intentional conversations. As I stated before, one of the initiatives through the mayor's office is really a neighborhood working group. And as we work with that group, MARTA is at the table to make sure that we can understand the transit needs and the opportunity for expansion of those transit needs. I would also say MARTA has a preservation fund, right? And so where we can leverage the opportunity with their preservation fund to either acquire different parcels, we definitely want to do that. Because again, every dollar we have needs to go into getting these units up and making sure we have more affordability.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And then my comment, and you shared this during your presentation, but I know we've asked a lot of hard questions, and I do want to end on a high note and just really share my appreciation to the Atlanta Housing team for your work in recognizing the history of Techwood Homes, of University Homes, and not only recognizing that history, but leaning in on that history and using that as a way to build a path forward and ensuring that the new developments at those sites or expansion of the developments of those sites are contextualized with that history. So I think it was a phenomenal couple of events that we did a couple of weeks ago.
Thank you, sir.
And I look forward to seeing where we land on the other side of it. But just thank you all so much for moving the needle on that.
No, thank you, and I appreciate the questions. We only grow, but quite honestly understand the position of City Council if we actually have questions. So I do appreciate the dialogue we've had here today, and I look forward to coming back again before you. So thank you so much for allowing Atlanta Housing to present today.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Just as I mentioned earlier, we do have one more communication that I would like to knock out so if my colleagues don't have an issue. Sergeant Thomas, if you could join us at the podium. And then we'll read in the caption and we'll have you talk about yourself a little bit.
Item number 2 is 22C5175, communication from council members Dustin Hillis, Andrea L. Boone, Marcy Collier Overstreet, Antonio Lewis, and Keisha Shawn Waits, appointing Sergeant Isaac Thomas to serve as a member of the Atlanta Commission on Veterans Affairs. This appointment is for a term of 2 years.
Sergeant Thomas, if you don't mind, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you're interested in this appointment.
First thing, good afternoon to the council. My name is Isaac Thomas, or I would say Sergeant Isaac Thomas. You can call me by my first name, Isaac, or I'm sorry, I messed that one up, Sergeant. I'm a native Atlanta, 1967 graduate of Henry McNeil Turner High School. Immediately upon graduation from high school, I enlisted into the United States Marine Corps, 1967. I was on active duty from 1967 to 1971, and then an additional 3 years in the Marine Corps Reserve. I'm a 1969, I served in the Republic of Vietnam, Charlie Company, 1st Battalion, 1st Marine. I am 100% totally and permanently disabled veteran due to my exposure to Agent Orange, and what I would like to do in any way I can to assist the veterans who need assistance, whether it's in housing, education, PTSD, whatever I could do. Because I've been there, done that, and I think that I would be a good person to be on this commission.
Thank you, Sergeant. Before we open it up for a motion or comments, I do want to acknowledge that last week was the Marine Corps birthday, so
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
happy belated birthday.
Yes, sir.
Um,
November 10th, sir.
yes.
247 years of ass-kicking glory.
Well, then on that note, I would be remiss if I didn't, as an Army guy, to point out that the largest amphibious assault in world history was conducted by the Army and not the Marine Corps. But, but I do appreciate you and your fellow Marines. Any questions or comments from colleagues? Well, with that, I'll go ahead. Well, Councilmember Bond, you have anything?
Thank you for your service.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
Well, I'll move approval. Can I get a second? Second by Hillis. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
And motion carries. I have 4, but I think we have 5 of us. Yes, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Thank you, Sergeant Thomas, for your
Yes,
service, and thank you for your continued service to the city of Atlanta.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir.
All right, now. All right, next up, going back to presentations, Catherine Bassel with the Atlanta Continuum of Care for the quarterly update. Good to see you.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, committee members. Catherine Bassel, the CEO at Partners for Home. We are the lead agency for the Atlanta Homeless Continuum of Care. And I'm here today for a presentation. I'm going to update you on our housing surge, which we've called LIFT 2.0. And I'm also going to provide an update on our supportive housing pipeline in partnership with Atlanta Housing and Fulton County. So just as a reminder, LIFT 2.0 is an effort to leverage $26 million in city and state stimulus funds with a private fundraising initiative to raise another $7 million for a total investment of $33 million to house 1,500 households who are experiencing homelessness over the next year and a half. The sort of high-level work that's to be done to get all of those individuals into housing includes outreach, engagement, and assessment with people who are unhoused, unit acquisition, shelter and bridge housing and operation, rental assistance with a rental assistance intermediary, and then long-term supportive services through case management. And what we have done at the systems level is really, rather than hiring 10 agencies to do a little bit of all of that, we have really tried to systematize that to create greater efficiencies and to get people streamlined faster into housing as quickly as possible. And so to that end, we have hired one entity to do all of the unit acquisition. And so they focus all of their time on finding landlords and units to move people into. We have one hotel operator, we have one entity that pays all the rents and all the utilities, and then we have several entities that just hone in on the outreach and engagement and rapid rehousing supports. So the initiative started about 60 days ago, actually about the early part of August. We have 5 partners that have been contracted to date, Gateway, Anise, Hope Atlanta, In-Town Collaborative Ministries, and Step Up. Among those 5 agencies, they've employed 12 full-time employees who have been assigned throughout the geography of the city of Atlanta and are providing boots on the ground engagement and outreach to individuals that are unhoused, and with a priority focus on encampments throughout our city. As a part of this work, we are prioritizing larger encampments that have been identified in partnership with the mayor's office and other stakeholders as priority encampments. There are 9 of them, and to date we have decommissioned 4 of them, and of those 4 that we've decommissioned, 145 individuals have been moved onto housing solutions, whether temporary or permanent. And those that are in temporary solutions are on their way to permanent housing placements as we speak. As a part of that work, we've created a encampment closure operating procedure so that everyone is aware of sort of how we work to decommission encampments, and inviting our partners and other stakeholders, including the State Department of Transportation, Atlanta Police Department, and other folks from the city to partner with us in this strategy. And really what that entails is essentially a period of outreach and engagement, getting to know every single person that's in that encampment, understanding their unique needs and preferences, connecting them to those next steps, whether it's interim housing, permanent housing, and then the actual closure, which is done in partnership with APD, Department of Public Works, and DOT, depending on where the property is. We've also created an opportunity for members of the general public to report encampments. They can email our office, they can call 311. There are obviously rising concerns among the general public, among elected officials and other stakeholders about growing encampments across the community. And so we're trying to keep an active pulse on every encampment in our community to make sure that the individuals that are being hired through our partner providers are being assigned to those locations to begin outreach and engagement and to begin the next steps of getting folks off the street and into housing. To date, we have leased out an entire hotel that has 108 hotel rooms. We have Gateway that is staffing that hotel to provide on-site supports and services. We have currently actually 116 people in hotels. We moved about 12 people in over the last few days. We have around 10 rooms remaining. And as rooms become available, as people move out into housing, we hold those rooms open for the next encampment or the next group of people that are going to be moving in from the street. As I mentioned, we have a unit acquisition team that has been hired through Open Doors. Many of you may be familiar with Open Doors. Their bread and butter is landlord acquisition. This is all they do, is engaging with landlords and apartment communities all around the metropolitan Atlanta community. And so their sole focus is on engaging landlords, creating an MOU with them, asking landlords to lower barriers to entry, to lower requirements around criminal background, around eviction histories, around credit issues, and really to negotiate and socialize the idea of taking a subsidy or a voucher. As you heard about from our partners at just a moment ago, it is very challenging to get landlords to accept vouchers and subsidies. And so this is really the primary focus of Open Doors. In addition, they're doing all the unit inspections, and they're helping to sort of smooth the way for individuals to get into housing. So this is just our tracker of the work, albeit our progress is starting off a little slow. This is how it happened with our first housing surge before we got up to 800 placements. And so we expect these thermometers to start moving over the coming months, all of which really is hinging on our unit acquisition. We are going to be launching a landlord forum with the mayor and Chris Womack of Georgia Power in the next couple weeks to really urge and entice landlords to come to the table and partner with this initiative. And we're hoping that will yield a significant amount of units. So as units come online, we have a system where case managers go into that system. They see available units. They are working with folks in the hotel and also individuals who are unsheltered, applying for those units, and then we're working on move-ins, and that process has begun over the last couple weeks. As I stated before, we are working with Project Community Connections. They're our rental assistance intermediary, so we've taken the fiscal responsibility out of the hands for paying rent and utilities from the case management providers, and this is all PCCI is focused on making sure those rents get paid, utilities get paid, and providing some additional training and support to the providers. Next steps for the surge work is continuing that housing navigation. That is critical. Make sure people have their documents and are ready to go as soon as a unit's available and it gets applied for. We're looking for another 560 units for this first phase. As a reminder, the goal is 1,500, and we're trying to break this up into phases. The first phase is the first 600 folks to move into housing, so we need 600 units. We're also working on the next group of encampments. And there's 4 on the list that remain that are priority encampments to be closed by the end of the year. As we bring on new providers, we're looking for an additional 18 FTEs. We have an open RFP currently to bring on that additional capacity. Those additional FTEs will be assigned, again, back out to the community and be assigned to geographic locations across Atlanta to prioritize unsheltered individuals. Want to just shift gears now really quickly to highlight our permanent supportive housing pipeline work. This initiative was launched through the Homeless Opportunity Bond that was passed back in 2017. As a reminder, we invested $22 million of the $25 million to build 550 new units of supportive housing. And I'm pleased to share with you, we have met and exceeded our goal of the 550 units. This partnership was made possible not just through the willingness of council and the administration to issue $25 million through the bond, but it was also made possible through our other public partners. I like to give affordable housing developers a hard time. They like to whine and cry about how hard their job is, and while it is hard to build affordable housing, supportive housing is particularly unique and challenging. We not only need the availability of an affordable unit, but because we're placing somebody in that unit with a long-term disabling condition who may only ever make as much as disability income, $800 a month, plus somebody who has been homeless, experiencing homelessness for a long time, they will also need services. And so not only do we need the affordable unit and the money to build it, but we also need long-term permanent subsidy to subsidize the rent for that person. And then we also need to figure out a way to pay for the services. So when we built this pipeline, AH came alongside us and agreed to commit to project-based rental assistance for all 550 units that we developed. And then the county came alongside and looked at our strategic plan, and they said, mental health is our sweet spot. This is where we fit in. We are going to commit, and they committed unanimously, to provide the cost of the services for everyone that is placed in those 550 units for the next 30 years. So we created what I like to call the three-legged stool for the development of supportive housing. And then the icing on the cake was we created one application for developers to apply to for all three funding streams. Typically, a developer has to go out there and figure out how to piece all of that together. And as you could imagine, frequently they throw up their hands and walk away. And so what we learned if you build it, they will come. We were able to entice a number of developers to the table who either had never done supportive housing before at all, maybe had only done affordable housing, and or who had never done supportive housing in Atlanta before. And we're very thrilled and excited to learn about the product, the accessibility of the product and the funding streams all in one place, and have been able to bring 22 deals to the table with over 560 units now in the pipeline. With 2 additional deals that are currently being underwritten at the moment, we will actually be almost at 600 units. And this is almost, these units are embedded within larger mixed income affordable developments for the most part. And so we like to think that this product is also helping to spur the development of a total of about 2,000 mixed income affordable developments. So just want to run you through some of the properties, and I'm not going to go through all the detail of these. You'll have the deck to look at afterwards, but just to give you sort of a sampling of the type of developments that we have units in. And again, all of these units are prioritized for people that are chronically homeless. That's a term of art from HUD. It means somebody is a long-term disabled and has the requisite length of time homeless. So they have been homeless for a year or more or have had multiple episodes of homelessness. This is a brand new development. We're moving 18 people in. Actually, they've been moving in over the last couple weeks on the Southside Beltline Trail with Prestwick at 55 Milton. Vecino Group, we're waiting on the CO. We hope to have it in January. This is on the west side off of Donnelly Hollowell. We will have 25 units reserved for young adults who are experiencing homelessness ages 18 to 24. Macaulay Park just broke ground. This is a unique partnership with Healthcare for the Homeless at Mercy Care and Penrose. And this is probably a year and a half out, but is now under construction. We'll have 30 supportive housing units there. 1265 Lakewood is right down the street from Milton, a few blocks away from the Southside Beltline Trail. This is another partnership with Prestwick with 16 supportive housing units. Thrive Sweet Auburn is out of the ground and well underway. This is a brand new engagement of Project Community Connections, never been involved in supportive housing or housing development before, partnering with Mercy Housing, catty corner to the King Memorial train station right on Decatur Street in the old 4th Ward. Capitol View, I'm sure you all are familiar with. Most of those were all new construction. This is an example of a historic preservation and also preservation of a NOAA, a naturally occurring affordable development. And we have 24 people that are living here on the West Side Beltline. Abington and Ormwood, we are waiting for this to close, but very excited to be in East Atlanta, Ormwood Park neighborhood, and we will have 8 units once this one comes online, and we are patiently waiting. The Mallory is over in Dixie Hills. There'll be 14 units there, and that's another Prestwick. Stanton Park is out of the ground. This is around the corner from my house. I'm super excited about this, and also on the South Side Beltline with Woda Group. Dwell at the Alcove was our first property to come online. We have 9 units there. It is also over on the west side in Grove Park and was a renovation. Adair Lofts, if you haven't seen it, I would strongly encourage you to go check out Adair Lofts. It is in the heart of Adair Park, walking distance to the West Side Beltline. We have 5 units here. They're micro units. This is a historic renovation of an old schoolhouse. They did an amazing job preserving all of the old elements of the building, the high ceilings, the beautiful windows, hardwood floors. There's chalkboards still in some of the apartments and the hooks where the kids would hang up their backpacks. And there's a coffee shop in the building and an event space. And it's a live workspace for artists. Quest in English Avenue is one of our deals with Quest Community Development. We will have, this is an example of a congregate deal where all of the units are supportive housing, and there are 12 units. This was a renovation, a rehab. This thing doesn't want to move. This is another example of a congregate deal, also 102 units of supportive housing. This is the old Job Corps building. Many of you have probably been wondering what's going to be happening with that building. This is now finally moving forward, we hope, and in the works, but construction has not yet begun. 1200 Mobile is online. On the west side, we have 10 units out of 40 there, and those are micro units. The Edgewood Center was a rehab, and we added 4 new units as a part of that rehab, and that's right across from the Curb Market on Edgewood. Centravilla was a brand new, partnership with Community Solutions, which is a national firm, and we have 66 units that are dedicated for veterans. Covenant House was just mentioned. This is the only property that will be dedicated as a time-limited independent living program for young adults. It is now online, and we're getting ready to move folks in over the coming weeks. 1055 Arden is another Prestwick deal, and this is on the west side with 11 units of PSH. 111 Moreland, another congregate, 42 units SRO style. We're working to get approvals on this one on the east side, and then the Atlanta Motel. This is 54 units. They have closed on this property. We're waiting on the environmental review to begin construction there. I think that's it. Last one is Sylvan Hills. Don't yet have a rendering on this one. There will be 45 units of supportive housing, and this will be in the Capitol View Sylvan Hill neighborhood. Maybe this is the last one. Holly Street. And the next step. So Terry Lee alluded to this in her presentation. We understand there's about $10 million in the housing affordability bond that's been earmarked for supportive housing. Now that we've exhausted our dollars from the homeless bond, our plan, our hope, our dream is that we can continue this pipeline. We need to have dedicated, sustainable revenue and resources that are going to continue to create housing for people experiencing homelessness on an ongoing basis. We can't stop here, and this can't just be a one and done thing. So our hope is to working on unlocking those funds, looking to potentially invite the private sector to matching those dollars for another $20 million investment. And then of course, having to go back to our public partners to figure out how to secure the rental assistance and the services. So that is the end of the presentation. Happy to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you so much for the presentation and for all the projects that are happening across the city. And my hope is that we can get some more District 4 projects in the mix as well. Before I turn over to colleagues, I did have a question around just generally how things have been going with the permanent supportive housing program. Number one, how has been the response of the developers who've been involved with the program? Has it been something they've said, hey, this is something we want to continue to do, that sort of thing? Number two, where are there opportunities to bring more developers into the fold for taking advantage of a program like this? Like what drew the developers that you've been working with, and what can we expand on to get more developers to the table, recognizing that often we hear concerns about additional administrative burdens or additional, you alluded to some of those things in your presentation, but what more can we do as a council to ensure that more developers are brought to the table? And then lastly, oftentimes for programs like this, and we've seen it with the Housing Choice Vouchers and other programs, there's typically a waiting list for access to those units. What does the waiting list look like for folks who are eligible for permanent supportive housing through this program? But what's the gap that we have to try to fill so that we know how to best divert our city resources?
Yeah, I mean, I think as I said at the beginning, we have to make it easy for developers to do supportive housing. Otherwise, I don't think they're going to do it on their own. And if a developer has to go to one place for the capital, one place for the subsidy, and then try to figure out how to get services in place, even if it's through a partner service provider, because we haven't expanded Medicaid, the resources are just not there readily available to piece all of those things together. So I think we've created a roadmap that's easily replicated in terms of, essentially just getting the agreement of all those partners. We have a process in place now. We have a calibration committee with representation from AH, the City of Atlanta, Invest Atlanta, and then an underwriter from the Corporation for Supportive Housing, where an application comes into that one place. We underwrite it all together and use that calibration committee to review everything, review the capital stack, make sure it all lines up, and then we take that to another body who oversees the funding decisions, and they approve the funding. And then it actually has to go through a series of board approvals at AH. So there's a lot of checks and balances in place, but I think it smooths the way for the developer, because for them, they're only having to go to one place to put together, those three funding streams. So I think to the extent that we can continue to do that and reinvest in this fund, we can get more developments, we'll get more developers coming to the table. I think when we first created the product, a developer, was like, oh, you're crazy. Nobody's gonna apply for these funds with $40,000 a unit. That's ridiculous. It's not enough money. And here we are a few years later, and we've exceeded the goal. So I think we found that making it grant dollars has been another major positive. Even though there's other funds out there that are either low or no cost debt that maybe gets forgiven down the road, the grant funds make it a lot easier, where we do have strings attached to the money, but getting that funds to fill gaps has been also another very critical piece to that. I think on the neighborhood side of things, where, for the most part, we are a small percentage of the larger development, it has been extremely easy to move these developments forward because we're not concentrating poverty, and we're not concentrating, all of, a large number of people who are coming out of homelessness all in one place. And so it's been, I think, very easy for the most part on the community acceptance side of things to move these developments forward as well. It's much more palatable to think about, I am living in a 200-unit complex with lots of different kinds of people. That I think has been a much easier road to go down for developers, and they sort of been able to say, oh yeah, you're giving me the subsidy, you're giving me the capital, and they're coming with services. I can't get that on the market. So I think that's been very enticing.
And wait lists, if there.
Oh, the wait
any?
list. Yeah, so as I said, everybody that moves into these units are prioritized through the housing queue. So we check and verify, make sure that individuals that are moving into these units are chronically homeless, and they've been assessed by an outreach worker, a housing navigator, they've been put on the housing queue. So in order to get placed into the units that are designated supportive housing, you have to be homeless and you have to have been homeless for quite some time and have a verified disability.
Thank you.
Yes.
Councilmember Westmoreland.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you for your presentation. One question, one comment. On the rental assistance slide, Project Community Connections, walk us through the process of a resident of Atlanta who is seeking assistance with their security deposit or renter's insurance or rental assistance or utility payments. Who do they reach out to? What is that process like? How much do we contribute to people when they ask for help?
So for Lift 2.0, this program is for individuals who are unsheltered and or who are chronically homeless. So for rapid rehousing for them, they are being identified either if they're in shelter and chronically homeless or through outreach and engagement if they're unsheltered. If they're referred to rapid rehousing, then we have budgeted up to 18 to 24 months of rental assistance for that household. So PCCI, once they identify a unit, apply for a unit, they will cut a check for security deposit, first month's rent, and utility assistance. Rapid rehousing is what we call a progressive engagement model, so it really depends on the individual. So one person might need 6 months of rental assistance, maybe they get back on their feet, they get a job. At month 7, PCCI will pay 75% of the rent, and the household pays 25%. At month 8, it's 50-50. At month 9, it's 25-75 or 75-25. And at month 10, the individual is paying their own rent. For another household, they might need 12 months of 100% of rental assistance, and that at month 11 or whatever it is, we are starting sort of the progressive engagement of backing out of the rental assistance. So that is typically the way the rental assistance program works for an initiative like this for rapid rehousing.
I don't know if it was like caveat necessarily, but the first 10 or so seconds of your answer was about this is unique to people in chronic homeless situations, and you mentioned earlier that that was defined as folks who had been homeless for upwards of a year or experienced several instances of it. What happens when someone doesn't meet that definition but is in need of assistance, like the aspects you just laid out in this slide deck?
They're in need of assistance.
What if someone calls and doesn't have a house, but that's a recent situation in the last 3 or 4 weeks, and they don't meet any definitions of?
Yeah. So we have started an initiative called Diversion, and this is really designed for somebody sort of who you're describing, somebody that's episodically or newly homeless. Diversion is a very shallow subsidy. It maxes out at usually around $3,000 per household, and it's coupled with some problem-solving supports. So for somebody who's just fallen into homelessness, maybe they've just lost their job, or they have exhausted their network, then we would attempt to refer them to Diversion. Diversion is super flexible. It can really pay for almost anything to exit them out of homelessness. We're funding it currently through private philanthropic dollars. We have 2 diversion teams that are funded through Zaban and Gateway. An individual can get referred to Diversion through 311, or they can get a housing assessment through one of our housing assessors, either at Gateway or throughout the community, and they can get referred to Diversion that way. But Diversion is typically reserved for that individual that you're talking about, again, sort of first-time homeless, episodically homeless, who can exit very quickly or who we can divert out of our system altogether before coming into homelessness.
And When does someone, what is the line at which someone shifts from being a potential recipient of diversion services to this?
So it just depends on the individual needs. I mean, typically with diversion, we're really trying to target people that have been in our system for a very short period of time. But it's through a conversation with that individual to identify, do they have any natural supports in the community? Can they go back to is there any family? Is there any friends? Any network that you could rely on that we could help you get back to? You know, sometimes people have a job and they're unhoused and they say, you know, I've been bouncing from place to place, sleeping outside tonight. I need help with security deposit and first month's rent. We can do that through diversion. Maybe I have a line of sight on a job, but I need some money for a uniform or work boots or whatever. We can do that. So there's no clear division line. It's really just based on the individual needs of that individual, and then relying on what is their network, what is their natural supports, and what is the most appropriate intervention for that individual. I mean, the reality is, if you're not unsheltered and not chronic, and diversion is not a good fit for you, our system doesn't have enough housing interventions or resources for every single person experiencing homelessness today. So there may be other things that we might look to do for that individual, whether it's getting them into shelter and they're working on getting a job and getting income to get out of the system, whether it is getting access to rapid rehousing over time, maybe it's getting into drug treatment, you know, any sort of number of different potential pathways.
Sorry, I'm asking more than I expected to. And it might be hard to pinpoint from over the period of a certain period of time, whether it's a month or 2 or 3, but pick a length of time. How many folks in that period of time did Partners for Home interact with, come into contact with, that fall under the chronic umbrella versus the not chronic umbrella?
So at any given time in our system, we have about 400 to 500 households that are experiencing chronic homelessness. The remainder are non-chronic, and that's, you know, anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 households.
Okay, I'm going to mull that for a second and defer to my colleagues with one final comment, and that is, when Councilmember Bond and I passed the Housing Opportunity Bond back in January of 21, there was a conversation about exhausting the dollars that Partners for Home had first, and then once those were gone, coming back and getting this $10 million. So now that that's the case, let's go and let us know how we can help push whoever needs a nudge to make that a reality. But we literally voted to allocate the funding, so let's go spend it.
Roger that.
Thank you, Councilmember Westmoreland. Councilmember Bakhtiari.
Yeah, something occurred to me as we were sitting here talking. The current, first, thank you for the presentation. Let me not get ahead of myself. The current ordinance on the books that says that you cannot build supportive housing within 2,000 feet of another supportive housing development. This might be a ridiculous question, but how difficult has that made your job in terms of like finding and being able to build? Because oftentimes, to me, it makes very logical sense that, like, yes, supportive housing should be distributed across the city. But to me, it makes sense to have supportive housing developments next to each other, especially in communities where we have high homeless populations, because obviously the idea of tearing apart community can be pretty destructive if people have lived in one area their whole life. So I kind of wanted to get your opinion on that.
Yeah, I mean, this is an ordinance that's been on our radar and a concern of ours for many years now. You know, my understanding and in many discussions with the late Councilmember Ivor Young, who was the sponsor of the bill, you know, it sort of originated because his district was being targeted by a lot of bad actors who it wasn't even so much supportive housing providers, it was really more so, boarding houses, personal care homes, that were sort of popping up all over his district and targeting his district because of how easy it was to find available properties and homes and just kind of put something together and not tend to it the way it needed to be. And so, I mean, I think it does make it challenging. That said, we have sort of created a process to seek an exception. And can't remember off the top of my head if any of y'all have sponsored any of those exceptions, but
I've just done one with Georgia Works.
I was going to say, we're going to be coming to you for one, for 54 Moreland. So, I mean, that process has been working for the most part. But I do think there are problems with the ordinance in that it targets people, namely who are disabled, and, creates this specific zoning restriction for them. So, it's a great question. It's a headache. It's not an insurmountable headache so far, knock on wood.
Well, I don't know if this is real wood, but I'll knock on it. That was really helpful because I've been talking a lot about it, but not yet to the providers who have to deal with that. I just did a waiver for Georgia Works because they need more space. And obviously freeing up additional beds for them will be great for populations that need to be rehoused. In terms of what your greatest obstacle, and again, this might be another ridiculous question, but in terms of, or a very logical one, in terms of what your greatest obstacle is with, kind of the bottleneck that y'all are dealing with now. I mean, because I don't know, what is our current estimate of people on the street, sheltered sheltered homeless via versus unsheltered, or both? Sheltered and unsheltered homeless.
Our last count was under 800, just under 800 people who are unsheltered, and another 1,200 in shelter.
So what is the greatest obstacle that y'all are, what would partners, what would continuum of care need? What can we do as council to help with? I mean, I was saying this earlier, we can fund all the outreach teams in the world, but if you have nowhere to place people, then it's just kind of a vicious circle. So what else can we do to ease?
Yeah, I mean, I think our biggest headwind right now is units. We need units, and there's no question about it. That's our biggest obstacle is the vacancy rates being so incredibly low right now, lower than what we were dealing with, a year and a half ago, and then rents higher, 30% higher or more than what we were dealing with a year and a half ago. It has definitely slowed us down tremendously. And, even there are people, in encampments, some of whom won't even go to the hotel, but are saying, I'd go to housing, directly to housing. And, outreach teams are getting frustrated because we're putting some people in a hotel and some people are still having to stay outside. The idea was that, we would secure enough units for everyone outside to go into those units. And so it's just been a much slower process than what we had hoped for. And also trying to make sure that the units that we are finding are safe and affordable so that when individuals discharge out of rapid rehousing, they can maintain that housing long term. So that really is our biggest headwind at the moment.
I'm guessing municipal IDs would also be a huge asset.
Well, only to the extent that a landlord would accept it.
Right.
And so, we've had that question, but that would be the biggest challenge, is then having to get landlords to say, well, will you accept this other form of ID? I mean, we can get folks document ready for the most part. If you're born in New York, it takes 6 months to get a birth certificate out of New York. But for the most part, we can get birth certificates quick from Georgia, and we can get state IDs. Now we're just playing a waiting game for these units.
Okay. And the other thing I was going to say is I know that I'm actively working on diversion centers, so I know that when we talk about housing, it's also that in between as we wait for more units to be built. We obviously, as a city, can move a lot faster in terms of making biometric lockers available, doing PO boxes, et cetera. So that would at least help with people staying outside. I'm going to do my best to do one in the Sweet Auburn area and throughout in some of our high encampment areas, just to put that on your radar. But I have been working for 11 months now to try to find a location off of Edgewood to do that. So you have my commitment that I will make sure to keep on
Thank you.
making that happen. I know we have a long way to go, but thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Bakhtiari. Councilmember Bond.
My mic wasn't on the whole time.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again for a very good presentation. I just have a couple of questions. On the issue of encampments, do you all have a map that you can share with us where these encampments either are or might typically or have been in the past?
Yes, we do.
Okay. And if you could share that, I'd appreciate it.
Sure.
Then, of the individuals that we service, I'm just curious, do you have a breakdown of those who might be from Atlanta Metro, Georgia, versus other places?
Yes and no. We don't currently collect last known zip code, but we have done that during the point in time count. In large part, from the data we've collected in the past, the majority of people who are homeless in Atlanta are from Atlanta, from the metro at least. And usually it's around a 70-30 split. About 70% of the population experiencing homelessness is from Atlanta. The other 30% are from other parts.
Well, that leads me to my next question, and I'll try to go as quick as I can. Are other jurisdictions matching what we're doing? Or how do we match up, or how do they match up against what we're doing? So I'm sure that we're the leader.
Nationally or in Georgia?
Well, just regionally, since by your estimation, 70% of those who are chronically unhoused are from the region.
Yeah, I would say, Atlanta's continuum of care has definitely the most sort of comprehensive system in place to address the issues. We definitely have we have a third of the homeless population across the whole state. So on any given night, about a third of the total population is in the city of Atlanta proper. For the metro area, the majority of resources and services sit in the city of Atlanta proper. And so oftentimes if somebody's experiencing homelessness in the metro, they are going to come to the city proper to get services. I think we have the most resources and services comparatively to the region.
Do you see any effort around the region to kind of match what we do? Is that too hot of a political question to ask? I'm pretty sure I know the answer. I can guess what the answer is.
There are 9 COCs in the state of Georgia. So all the major metropolitan cities, and then Atlanta, Fulton County, DeKalb County, Cobb County. All the other counties in the metro are consumed and led by the balance of the state continuum of care, which is based at Department of Community Affairs.
Okay.
The numbers in those neighboring COCs are substantially lower. We're talking in the hundreds of people experiencing homelessness. And so the staff at those COCs are small. I mean, there's like 2 and 3 people in those staffs. We have 20 people on staff, really trying to lead and coordinate and leverage and align resources on any given day. So if that kind of gives you a sense of sort of the level of infrastructure comparatively.
Well, I'm excited about what you showed us on the old Wallahaji, the Job Corps Center.
Oh, yes.
It was a hotel, that was the name. So you say you haven't yet begun construction, but you've got the plan in place for the renovation?
That's right. It's been a monumental effort with many, many partners. Columbia, Atlanta Housing is now engaged. And the exciting thing about it is Quest does plan on really reviving the history of the hotel and really trying to honor its legacy. So we're excited about that. But they are still trying to piece together the final components of the capital stack and get all of that in order. West Side Future Fund is another partner. And so we've come very long way, and now the wheels are finally turning again. So I'm hoping in '23 that renovations will begin. It's already set up quite nice to suit a sort of residential environment. And so, we're not going to have to completely tear it down and start over from scratch. But we're probably still another 18 to 24 months out.
Yeah, that's a huge building.
Yeah.
Well, just to close out, I really do appreciate the work that you and your colleagues do in this effort. I know that it is unyielding because there's always someone new in the situation in need of services. But I wanted to ask you, I know at one point we had 2 hotels, didn't we? At least. Are we going to obtain another, or are we going to go back to the one we had before? Do you need another hotel?
We are actively looking for more interim bridge housing, like a hotel. So yes, I think we do. We did have 2. One was just for people who had COVID. So it was very small numbers that were ever there. We're looking at a couple other possibilities. There's a development partner who is going under contract on a larger hotel. We're hoping that we will be able to utilize that space. It's 200 rooms. And they are working through the details of the contract negotiations now. Our current partner has another property, and so we're negotiating with them for some additional rooms. It's a difficult proposition because they're very expensive, and the question of trying to pay for those in the short term versus using that money for long-term housing is a difficult decision to make, but we are looking at trying to add some additional interim housing options.
Well, of course, as always, we can be any type of support or resource to you, we would do so. And I want to say it here first that now that the elections are over, that homelessness is a national issue. It's not a local issue. It's not a state issue. It's a national issue. And that's why I raised the question around HUD with the Atlanta Housing Authority, is that we need a national policy and a national response on the homelessness crisis in America. It's not just Atlanta's problem. It's not the region's problem, the state's problem. This is a national problem, and we need a national response to it.
Indeed, absolutely, couldn't agree with you more. We haven't been investing in the levels of subsidized housing since 1980, and it's time that we start looking at doing that again at the federal level as well.
I withdraw, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Bond. One final question for you before you depart, Ms. Bassel. I'm just thinking about the LIFT 2.0 portion of the presentation. I'm curious what you all are doing to ensure that the housing opportunities that you find through that program are adequate, or retain a quality of life that provides our residents with dignity. And I bring this up because a couple of weeks ago it was shared with me that some of the communities in which some of our unsheltered neighbors ended up in as part of LIFT 1.0 were actually on the list of negligent complexes that were identified by the city not too long ago. And so just curious what you all are doing to ensure that we have a positive pathway forward for
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And, that list came out this summer. We are making sure Open Doors is cross-checking that list with any complex that we're engaging with. We have to, every unit that we, rent or lease on behalf of a tenant has to go through the HUD HQS, the Quality Standards Inspection. And anything that fails or, any parts of that does not pass, we go back to the landlord and ask them to rectify those issues, and they're required to rectify them before they can pass the inspection. I think part of the challenge that we've been faced with is, one, again, battling this difficult housing market and trying to find units in general. But two, as a part of that process, property management changes hands, in some cases, multiple times a year. And so we may go in and partner with a landlord, today who is a good actor or is acting in good faith to fix and repair changes or problems. And then property management changes hands 3 months from now, and the new property management that comes in is a bad actor, and we're bringing issues or challenges to their attention, and they could care less, and they're not fixing things or working to make any improvements on the property. So that is a challenge that, we're trying to figure out how do we surmount that. But, we are trying to get as creative as we can on the financial incentive side to incentivize new and higher class properties and landlords to partner with us. I did mention we're having this mayoral forum, in 2 weeks right after Thanksgiving, as an effort to get more landlords engaged. But it's an ongoing challenge.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? That was it. I appreciate you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. All right, we have one more presentation. Andy Schnegenberger with the Atlanta Housing Commission. Good to see you again, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good afternoon, council members. Happy to finally be here. My charge here is to report out on behalf of my fellow commissioners. Again, my name is Andy Schnegenberger. I'm currently the chair of the Atlanta Housing Commission. With me here this afternoon is our vice chair, Mr. William McFarland, my partner in crime, so to speak. The commission, just a couple of basics first, right? We were established by enabling legislation in late 2017 and started up and running in earnest in 2018. We are an appointed body with 4 charges to work on to assess the city's policies, the city's financing tools for affordable housing, the permitting process, and then to explore national best practices related to affordable housing policy. And we are asked to report to City Council at least once annually and to meet at least quarterly. This is a list of our current commission appointees. Myself, Mr. McFarland, Bambi Hayes Brown is our secretary. Dawn Arnold represents IRFA, or Invest Atlanta. Ruben Brooks represents Atlanta Beltline, Inc. Brandon Doherty is a new appointee. He represents the for-profit development sector. Miracle Fletcher, now, thank you very much, represents the seat reserved for a resident of an Atlanta housing program or a City of Atlanta program. And I'll say, I'm very excited to have her voice on the commission. It's an important, very important voice, and it hasn't been populated to this point after 3 years. So I'm very excited to have her join us. Josh Humphreys represents the Office of Housing. Terry Lee represents Atlanta Housing, and we do have 2 currently vacant seats. One for a representative of the Continuum of Care, appointed by Council seats 9, 10, 11, 12, and Post 3. And the final seat that's vacant, representative of the mortgage lending industry, appointed by Council President. I have been able to forward recommendations to both of those appointed bodies, and hopefully there will be some action on that in the coming weeks. But nonetheless, those 2 seats are now still vacant. What we've done since we were initially stood up is created operating procedures in a committee structure to structure our work, to make sure that given the variety of voices on the commission, we are approaching our recommendations from an objective and a data-oriented standpoint as much as possible. We do take a lot of effort to make sure that we remain connected with housing advocates and stakeholders in terms of inviting groups for presentations, and certainly allowing for a pretty robust public comment period at the beginning of our meetings. We have also developed an assessment tool, framework, and metrics to help with our objective assessment of policies. And then as a group, we've also prioritized certain areas within the sort of the housing issue continuum that we try to focus on and shine a light on, those being the income demographics below 80% of AMI and below 50% of AMI, pushing for long-term affordability, resident retention, and then increasingly now looking at the City of Atlanta's housing delivery system as a whole to help guide the recommendations that we make. We have, in terms of our system, we have a lot of parts and pieces that are working. They don't necessarily always work very well together. And then we certainly have gaps in that system. And that's part of the work that I think we can be helpful moving forward in identifying where we can start to do some work to help fill those gaps. We are an unfunded mandate. We were stood up without a budget. That does limit the amount of work that I personally would like us to be able to do. I know some of my fellow commissioners share that frustration, but the reality of this situation is that this is pretty intensive work to assess existing policies and financing practices, especially when we're looking at best practices nationwide. We would benefit greatly from a budget that would allow us to hire out some of this research work, some of the data collection that would help us move more quickly in our deliberations. We also lack full-time support, full-time staff support. We do have a part-time staff support now, and that helps, but it certainly, again, it doesn't allow us to move at the pace that I would certainly like to. I mentioned the 2 vacant seats. And we also, part of us being here today is starting to make a dent in this next bullet, I think. But I would really, I think the commission would benefit and council would benefit collectively in our ability to find a way to stay better connected on housing policy, the creation of policy, the thinking behind it. I feel like the commission was created to be a resource. And we would all benefit greatly, I think, in being able to find a way to create and maintain a dependable communication structure between the commission and council members that are really interested in moving affordable housing policy. There is a piece of legislation that I think 2 months ago we did make a vote of approval on as a commission that would amend the enabling legislation. Some of the amendments in there will help, but there are certainly a few more items I think that could help even more. Happy to talk about that at a future date. I should say that although that legislation has been approved by the commission to the extent that we have the power to do so. I'm not sure what the state of that legislation is, whether it's been introduced by anyone in council yet. The Office of Housing was carrying that legislation, so I'm just not sure right now, speaking to you today, where that legislation sits as yet. So we have generated some pretty key recommendations. Most recently, we did agree to a recommendation regarding the use of Building the Beloved Community Housing Trust Funds. I'll speak to that in a moment. We did help with some thinking around how the Housing Opportunity Bond Program would be structured and administered. We made recommendations also on the zoning reform initiative that was on the table last year, as well as ARP allocations. And then this is another important one I'd like to call attention to, the 20-year restriction on covenants that is in state law. That is really a significant barrier to the city's ability to pursue long-term affordability. The limitation that the city has in being able to require only a 20-year affordability period from developers really obviously limits the long-term value of the investments that the city makes in affordable housing. So this would be something I think that that we recommend being placed on the city's legislative agenda with the state every year, and continuing to work on it until such time as we can finally get it over the hump. But that's a very important, but I think little regarded barrier that would really help move things. So we did have a meeting. Thank you for those of you that showed up earlier this year. That was a great conversation. It really helped us clarify our thinking. What we heard from y'all in general was give us some guidance on policy priorities. And so this year we were really focused on the administration and use of housing trust fund dollars. We've birthed that baby, so to speak, and we have agreed that next year we're going to take a look at tenants' rights issues and see how we can support some of the legislation that we know is on the table, and if not, make some recommendations about where there are some gaps that may be feasible here in the city of Atlanta. Another very important piece of work that is currently being done is a comparison of the different housing plans that we know have already been done, right? We have House ATL, we have the city's One Atlanta Housing Affordability Action Plan, we have a plan that Invest Atlanta did a couple years ago. There are plans from, as far back as 2007, 2006. What we've realized is that there are certainly threads between all of those that are continue across the spectrum over time. What we've done is we're taking a look at how all these different studies have overlap and where there are gaps in recommendations that have not been implemented. Also, where there are points that have been implemented and how well those are working. So what we hope to have is essentially a database or a graphic that we can look at to help us understand how these different plans overlap and where there are commonalities and where there are differences. And that will help us with our thinking going forward about recommendations that we can make to City Council, not only just in terms of policies that could move from the dime, but also to help prioritize the ones that we think could get the most bang for the buck, so to speak, or fill a most important gap. So there will be some prioritization work that I think that study will help us do as well. We've also realized that there's some value in helping City Council and the Mayor's office recognize where there are state laws that are barriers that need to be on the city's legislative agenda at the state capitol. The one around the 20-year limitation on liens on private property is certainly one of those. Jumped ahead? Yes, here we go. So I wanted to talk for a few minutes about our recommendation about the Housing Trust Fund. It's pretty simple and straightforward, I think, for the most part, but number one, we're recommending that the trust fund be used specifically for affordable housing purposes. Specifically and only for affordable housing purposes, that those funds be deployed as grants or as equity. You heard from both Ms. Lee and Ms. Vassell earlier today how important those types of funds are to the feasibility of projects, especially as we're trying to get to the lower income households. We also recommend that the eligibility of uses or activities of those funds be as flexible as possible so that they can support the initiation and completion of projects from day one. So activities would include then pre-development, that very high-risk money that often limits nonprofit affordable housing and developers in particular from pursuing projects. But these funds could also be used for infrastructure. That sounds familiar. Acquisition, construction, down payment assistance, right? Rent subsidies. So a very flexible set of uses for those funds will do wonders to help projects move forward and to boost production. This last point is one that we went back and forth on probably the most, but it recognizes the fact that right now there is no consistent and reliable source of funds to help support the production of units for households that earn or have income below 50% of the area median, right? We have inclusionary zoning that helps produce units at 80% AMI and at 60% AMI. We have, Invest Atlanta's lease purchase program, which also targets units at 80% AMI. There's nothing that is grant-based or equity-based that helps support production of units at those very low incomes, which is where the most critical gap is. That's not only where the largest gap is in terms of available homes for those households, but it's also, those are the ones that are also hardest to produce, simply because they're, well, for the most part, those resources aren't available. So there's a real opportunity to be able to pair up these funds with housing opportunity bond debt, so that these two tools working together can really boost the production of those types of units. With the very low interest debt you get from the housing opportunity bond, especially for nonprofit developers, with this kind of grant equity, that's what will make these things move. I speak from experience, not just recently, but also from the past 20 years of my involvement in affordable housing production. To the point then, this last bullet, what we agreed on is that we would recommend that the first $20 million, essentially the first 2 years of capitalization in the Housing Trust Fund, really be dedicated specifically to the production of these units for households at 50% of AMI and below. But then also recognizing that there are, we have a lot of affordable housing needs. Thereafter, right, for funds after those first 20 million, opening it up to help support production of any type of housing for households that earn or have incomes up to 80% of the area median. So I hope that makes sense, right? But essentially it's putting a stake in the ground for the first 20 million about producing these very low income units and then opening it up afterwards. I'll also say one of the side notes in the recommendation, recognizing the fact that $10 million a year for a housing trust fund is wholly inadequate. And I find it's hard for me to say that because I know what a big lift it was to actually get this thing created in the first place. This is a huge, important new tool for the city of Atlanta. $10 million a year is wholly inadequate for what we need, right? For the and to support the actors that are out there that are willing and able to do it, don't have the resources to do it, right? To produce, I mean. So what I want to use a few minutes here today to encourage you all is to the extent that each of you are in a room with philanthropic, corporate investors or entities, and this goes for the mayor's office also, right? We need philanthropic investment to help boost this housing trust fund. It ought to be an easy win. They will know once the administrative capacity and framework for the housing trust fund is established, they will know what their money will be going to. And if there's support for the production of affordable housing, investment in this housing trust fund ought to be, again, an easy win for anybody that is wanting to help make that happen. So that, again, is an encouragement to keep pressing for that kind of investment. It's also a reminder that initially a housing trust fund, when we began talking about this years ago, that it's centered around the creation of a dedicated funding source, right? One that's not reliant on budgetary decisions by the mayor's office or city council, but one that is generated from activity that we know will happen, transfer fees, those sorts of things, right? A source that will outlast or will carry through the changes in time, and that will be a consistent source over time, even if it fluctuates a little bit, right? But if it's something that, and this is another important point, if it's something that, especially our nonprofit developers, can count on every year that they know it's going to be there, that will help them pipeline projects much more effectively than they're able to do right now also. with that, again, I think, we were created as a resource. I plan to, as long as I continue to be chair, I'll plan to start coming here twice a year, if not more. I value this ability to talk about what we're doing, the challenges we're having, with the issues we're discussing, but also to offer assistance. We're here for anybody that is interested in pushing affordable housing policies. We're here to help. And I think that closes my comments, so I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you so much. We'll turn it over to my colleagues first. We'll start with Councilmember Bond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Chair, for your presentation. You mentioned in your presentation that $10 million a year is not enough for the size of the fund. What size would you recommend?
Let's go for a cool 100. No, seriously though.
No, I am serious.
Yeah. I said that cheekily, but that, I think that is the scale that we really need to look at when you consider the numbers that the presenters before me today spoke of, right? Ms. Vassell, Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee spoke about infrastructure needs, upwards of $250 million just for a single project. And that's a big project, right? But that's $250 million for infrastructure alone. And I know there's ways to finance that, to help mitigate that, right? And roll it into the project's long-term financial performance. But I think that kind of gives you an idea of the scale of investment that we really need to start thinking about. Ms. Vassell mentioned, was it 20 million that she's looking at for the next round of fundraising? That would be just for the homeless services work that the Continuum of Care provides. So if we're talking about really sort of boosting production for households that are earning upwards of up to 80% of AMI, if we're even going to limit it at that, right? But to also boost home ownership, to help build household equity. I think $100 million is a reasonable place to start.
So is that $100 million for a I don't want to say flat fund, but as a nest egg for a fund that you would take the interest off to invest in these projects, or you would spend?
Well, at that scale, right? At that scale, it becomes a whole different conversation, right? What we spoke of today for a $10 million housing trust fund is that money needs to be grant equity, right? But when you start talking about the scale of $100 million that will support multiple projects, I think at that point you get to a point where you can create a revolving loan fund from part of it, where you could provide actually very low interest financing with an expectation on return from some of it, and you can start to recycle those dollars. We know that model works well with Invest Atlanta. But regardless, for the creation of units for households at 50% AMI and below, we got to have grant equity to help produce those units. There's no way around it.
Well, let me just pose a question. I'll wrap up. I know the hour's getting late. So if we were to collect a mill outside of our regular millage rate, much like what we did for the Beltline, we did an additional mill. And so I guess a mill that we use for, let's say, the Park Improvement Fund tops off somewhere like $20 million a year. We could use that to, I guess, float a bond for $100 million over a certain period, or even probably more, to fund kind of what you're talking about.
For a part of it, yeah, right. As long as those bond proceeds, well, and here's where the rub is with the Housing Opportunity Bond Program, right? Those are bond proceeds, and so there are debt requirements on those bonds. I think that would probably help boost the production of the Housing Trust Fund from a debt facility perspective. But it's the funds, again, this is where I come back to philanthropic investments that don't have those kinds of strings attached, that can be awarded as grants or as project equity, that are really critical for a lot of the things that this city needs to do to produce its housing. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It does, and I'd like to talk to you more about it.
Yeah, happy to do so.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Councilmember Bond. Councilmember Westmoreland.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, squared. Good to see you. Thank you for your presentation. Quick, I said this when we reappointed you to the commission, but while this has been a topic for a long time, the fact that legislation got introduced on October 4th of 2021 to create a housing trust fund was a result of a couple of District 5 beers shared on September 9th that you were responsible for. So I want to make sure that's commonly spoken into the public. And what we passed in December of 2021, it set up pieces of what you are articulating, which is 1% of the general fund this year, 1.5% next year, 2% the following year, and for every year after, which was intended to create a reliable funding stream. And there were only two caveats written into the legislation for financial prudence. One was a bad recession and one was unprecedented inflation. And unfortunately, we hit unprecedented inflation in the first year it was intended to exist, and the mayor, to his credit, still made the allocation. And so I have every expectation that when we start talking about the FY23 budget, we will have the 1.5% allocation. But the broader conversation was that and I'd be down to talk with Councilmember Bond about shifting from a percentage of the general fund to a different, even more reliable funding stream. But the whole premise was that once we got up to 2% or whatever it ends up being, which would be $15 million a year, that once the city puts its skin in the game, much as we have with the homeless opportunity bond, that the philanthropic and business communities would come to the table as well. And they're not going to give us the money, nor should they really, right? We have a lot of well-established processes, whether it's the $2 million we gave to Park Pride last year that was matched by the Woodruff Foundation, or the money that Partners for Home gets from the city that gets matched by the philanthropic sector. There needs to be, or I think there probably should be, an entity outside of city government that receives our contribution and then a contribution from business and philanthropy, because that's to whom they are going to give their money. And that is how you turn $15 million a year into $30 million a year or more. So this presentation is a helpful reminder that we need to relight the fire of that conversation. And now that we've kind of had the first year in the budget to set the internal expectation that it will exist every year thereafter, and then to figure out the right operating vehicle on this topic and on early childhood education, so that there is money coming from business and philanthropy that'll help supercharge it. So there's a long way of saying I appreciate what you did last fall. I appreciate this presentation, and thank you.
Any other comments or questions from colleagues? All right, seeing none, thank you so much, Andy. Thanks for joining us. I think we're done.
All right, thank you.
All
Thank
right.
you.
We're done with presentations. I'll put it that way. All right, next item on the agenda, I believe we completed our communications. Well, we have one that we need to hold. Please read in the caption.
Item number 3 is 22C5176, a communication from Council President Doug Shipman appointing Mr. Sergio Mendez to serve as a member of the Atlanta Commission on Veterans Affairs. This appointment is for a term of 2 years.
Move to hold. Second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
Vote is open. And the vote is closed.
All right, the motion to hold is approved, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item. I believe we're on to ordinances for second reading, or for first reading.
Item number 4 is 22-01846, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee authorizing the mayor or his designee to amend the 2021 annual action plan of the 2020 through 2024 consolidated plan to accept an award of reallocated emergency solutions grant program CARES Act funds from the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to amend the 2021 Annual Action Plan budget and to add anticipations and appropriations Emergency Solutions Grant Program CARES Act funding in an amount of $1,750,161.20 for the purposes of supporting homeless assistance and homelessness prevention activities to mitigate the impacts created by the coronavirus pandemic and for other purposes. Item number 5 is 2233, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 1202 West Marietta Street from the office institutional land use designation to the mixed-use medium-density land use designation, and 1192 West Marietta Street from the mixed-use land use designation to the mixed-use medium-density land use designation and for other purposes. Item number 6 is 22-0-1848, CDP 2234, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 1060, 1070, and 1080 Rice Street Northwest from the single-family residential land use designation to the medium-density residential land use designation and for other purposes. Item number 7 is 22-0-1849, CDP 2236, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 2535 Glenwood Avenue Southeast from single-family residential land use designation to the medium-density residential land use designation and for other purposes. Item number 8 is 22-0-1850, CDP 2237, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 2866 Memorial Drive Southeast from the single-family residential land use designation to the high-density residential land use designation and for other purposes. Item number 9 is 22-0-1851, CDP 2238, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 930 Malden Street Southeast from this low-density commercial land use designation to the high-density residential land use designation and for other purposes. Item number 10 is 22-0-1852, CDP 2240, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 597 Auburn Avenue Northeast from the low-density residential land use designation to the low-density commercial land use designation and for other purposes. Item number 11 is 22-0-1853, CDP 2241, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 337 Georgia Avenue Southeast from the low-density residential land use designation to the low-density commercial land use designation and for other purposes. Item number 12 is 22-0-1854, CDP 2242, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate property located at 581 Edgewood Southeast from the low-density residential and low-density commercial land use designations to the mixed-use land use designation, and 21 Cornelius Street Southeast, 586 Izzard Street Southeast, and 0 Izzard Street from the low-density residential land use designation to the mixed-use land use designation and for other purposes. And finally, number 13, 22-0-1855, CDP 2245, an ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee to amend the land use element of the 2021 Atlanta Comprehensive Development Plan so as to redesignate certain properties along Campbellton Road between Butner Road Southwest and the City of Atlanta city limits from various land use designations to various land use designations to implement certain recommendations of the Campbellton Cascade Corridor Redevelopment Plan and for other purposes.
Thank you. And just a reminder, these items are for first read, so there's no action taken on them today. Moving on to ordinances for second reading, please read the first caption.
There's a substitute for item number 14. Would the committee like to bring the substitute forward?
Yes. Second. Move, please bring forth the substitute. Second by Westmoreland.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
Motion to bring forth the substitute carries 4 yeas, 0 nays.
The substitute caption reads, a substitute ordinance by Community Development Human Services Committee, a substitute ordinance by Community Development Human Services Committee authorizing the Department of Parks and Recreation to utilize the City of Atlanta Tree Trust Fund as the source of funding for management activities for property designated in perpetuity as forest land on 178.3676 acres of real property located at 0 Fairburn Road. Tax parcel IDs listed here, Fulton County tax parcels for the protection, management, and regeneration of trees and other forest resources as authorized under the City Code Section 158-66B in an amount not to exceed $1,080,511.02 annually, to be paid from the Tree Trust Fund using the fund and account information listed herein and for other purposes.
Motion to approve on substitute by Westmoreland. I will second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
Item is favorable on substitute, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 15 is 22-01815. There's also a substitute in this, in your packet that adds the dollar amounts.
Please bring forth the substitute. Move to bring forth the substitute.
Second.
Second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
Vote is open. And the vote is closed.
Motion to bring forth the substitute is approved, 5 yeas, 0 nays.
Substitute caption reads, a substitute ordinance by Community Development and Human Services Committee. A substitute ordinance authorizing the mayor or his designee or chief procurement officer or his designee on behalf of the City of Atlanta to acquire from the Conservation Fund approximately 178 acres of real property located at 0 Fairburn Road Southwest, Atlanta, Georgia, Fulton County, tax parcel IDs listed here for the protection, maintenance, and regeneration of trees and other forest resources as authorized under the City Code Section 158-66B, to be redesignated in perpetuity as forest land, and to execute all documents necessary to acquire the property, and authorizing acquisition, due diligence, closing costs, signage, demolition, site security and stabilization, fencing, and other site development costs in an amount not to exceed $1,942,380.57, to be paid from the Tree Trust Fund using the fund and account information listed herein, waiving Section 2-1541D of the Procurement and Real Estate Code and for other purposes.
Deputy Commissioner Voss.
Thank you so much, Chairman Dozier. Thank you, Council Committee, for letting me speak on this ordinance. Just as a reminder, in 2016, Council and the Mayor authorized and approved an amendment to the Tree Trust Fund, which authorized the city to procure privately owned afforested property as long as there was 80% or more canopy cover, the minimum forestation standards of 1,000 dBH inches per acre, and 50 mature trees per acre, and or any of those requirements. We were able to make our first purchase in 2020, if you remember, using that ordinance for Lake Charlotte, the 216 acres. And today we're asking for the authority to purchase our second qualifying property. This is 178 acres in southwest Atlanta. It's on Fairburn Road. This is actually, I might be wrong, but it's about the 5th largest parcel that the parks would have in its inventory out of 400 properties. And it's also going to be a natural preserve in southwest Atlanta, which I think we all can, after COVID and everything else, our preserves have been more popular than ever, and the opportunity to be in one of our preserves has truly been something special. The city has received a site condition report for this property. There have been numerous items that need to be corrected, and so this legislation also includes what we call site stabilization. There is a large tire dump, there are many electronic equipments, there is a tractor that needs to be removed from this property. Our goal is to get the property open to the public safely as soon as possible, so we have included the site stabilization within this ordinance to get the property. This is the same thing we did at Lake Charlotte, and that project worked seamlessly. The property meets the forestation requirement and preserves and contributes to the Camp Creek watershed. Many creeks in this property flow into what's known as Lake Coward and then become part of the Chattahoochee River Basin. It is in the best interest of the city to acquire the property as forested land. We would be purchasing it from the Conservation Fund because of its high mature tree value, and it is our recommendation that this ordinance be approved, and we take the second opportunity to use the Tree Trust Fund to, in perpetuity, create forested land in southwest Atlanta. I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you. Councilmember Bond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Voss, for your presentation. This is indeed exciting news, and I support the legislation. My question is, though, that some of the issues that came out of the use of the Cascade Nature Preserve, some of the petty crimes that took place, part of what, in response to that, is that there's a lack of cameras out there. Does the work that's included in prepping this site include, I guess, the wiring for putting up cameras and then adding them into the VIC?
That's a great question. And actually, since we had that heavy presence, we actually have cameras in the parking lot area of Cascade Springs now. It would not be funded out of these funds, but yes, all of our new properties, the camera program, sometimes we're using license plate readers and such like that. It would not come out of these funds, but those are absolutely part of the site stabilization protocol.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Westmoreland.
Thank you. After this purchase and the encumbrance of the maintenance dollars, do you know the balance of the Tree Trust Fund?
I knew you were going to ask that, which is why I'm so glad that Commissioner Prince is here from DCP. I'm not sure they can answer that question, but I'm sure we can get that information. The trust is actually handled under the city planning.
Touche, and an email is fine. I was just curious. Thank you.
I'll move to approve on substitute. Second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
All right, the motion is favorable on substitute, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Next item is item number 16-22-018-29, an ordinance by council members Michael Julian Bond, Jason Winston, Amir Faroki, Byron D. Amos, Jason Dozier, Liliana Bakhtiari, Alex Wan, Howard Shook, Mary Norwood, Dustin Hillis, Marcy Collier Overstreet, and Matt Westmoreland to amend the Atlanta City Code Part 2, General Ordinances, Chapter 158, Vegetation, Article 2, Tree Protection, to make several updates related to ordinance administration, tree planting and protection, and use of tree trust funds, to amend Part 3, Land Development Code, Part 15, Land Subdivision Ordinance, Sections 15-7.004, and for other purposes.
And I believe we have a substitute for this particular item.
There's an amendment that's been distributed via email to all the members, and you have a hard copy redlined version. It adds a Section 4. The Section 4 addition just reads that this ordinance shall become effective 120 days after its approval by the mayor or after its approval by operation of law under Atlanta City Code Section 2-403.
Got it. I'll go ahead and move to amend. Second by Westmoreland. Any discussion? Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
Motion is amended, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Before we move forward with motion, I know there's been a lot of community concern and frustration and all those negative words that are synonymous with frustration. And I've gotten a lot of emails. I believe all of us have gotten a lot of emails, texts, calls. I will say that since, I believe, March, myself, along with members of the environmental justice community, along with Trees Atlanta, along with the development community, along with the administration, along with the Department of City Planning, and like I said, several members of this body have been meeting as a working group to try to really land this plane. I know this has been a conversation that's been happening for some time, And the framework that was set at the beginning of that conversation was that we would attack the tree protection ordinance in multiple phases, with the first phase being low-hanging fruit is kind of how it was framed, where items that all the various bodies could or would agree on, things that are relatively quick fixes, things that would be easy to navigate politically, would be kind of the first tranche of legislation that will be introduced. And the culmination of those discussions and those conversations led to the paper that is before us today. With that being said, I know there's been a lot of concern about the final version of this legislation being presented back before the community for additional discussion and debate. That was something that I heard during public comment. That was something that I've heard over the last 48 hours. And I learned recently, too, that the Department of City Planning put together a document that really provides a summary of the proposed changes that is being defined in this legislation. It speaks to the overall process that led us here today. With that being said, I will admit this, the first time I actually saw this document was today, even though I've been involved in a lot of the conversations leading up to this particular legislation being introduced. And I know, if it was the first time for me seeing it, I know many of our community members may not have seen it as well. Separately, I know that there have been some outstanding concerns about seeing a final version of the legislation before it got introduced. And so just in deference to those concerns and in deference to the larger process and the larger framework that was agreed upon by all the different parties that came together, I'm actually going to move to hold this paper for 2 weeks so we have a little bit more time to discuss and debate and ensure that all of the communications and the frameworks and all these things that were discussed early on are being realized as we get to this final culmination. So I'll move to hold, second by Westmoreland. Any discussion? Seeing none. Oh, Councilmember Bond.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. That was a decent recap of what has taken place this year. And you're absolutely right. This has gone on for almost 5 years, trying to get to this point. And in the conversations coming back that myself and Mr. Westmoreland had with the administration to try to work out a process for which we can come to a final agreement or understanding on the type of ordinance that we need to have for our city, because we are losing a lot of trees, and there's pressure from those who might develop in certain areas for them to have a better and fairer understanding of how to operate. And then ultimately, given the reports that we've gotten in the last 30 days since the last, I guess it would be 70 days since we've met as a group to work on this particular piece of legislation, our climate crisis has worsened on planet Earth. So I think 2 weeks is prudent, because I've been asked by some of the activists to introduce amendments to this, and that wasn't initially a part of what we had planned. We had planned to, like I said, address the low-hanging fruit, the things that were not in dispute, and then have the other tranches, and ultimately the recompense fund, which is it's not an elephant in the room, it's the Godzilla in the room, addressed. And so I think holding it for 2 weeks is great, and everybody can get their pencils and pads and bring their notes and paperwork so that we can finally get the things that are not in dispute done, because with all this happening, we're still constantly losing trees at a rapid pace here in Atlanta. And there's something that wasn't a part of our discussions that I'd like to discuss with this body and interested members of council, is also working out an exemption for seniors that have threatening trees either in and around their yards. The ability to maybe try to find a way to tie it to the exemptions that we offer for age, like our homestead exemptions, et cetera, so that we can have a means to grant seniors some relief. that don't have the income and don't have the wherewithal necessarily to get trees cut down that might be threatening their homes or, falling in from a neighbor. So having said all that, I think everyone should take a deep breath who's listening and watching the meeting. Let's be ready to stick to the process that we've outlined, and we've got amendments that have been sent to, I believe, everybody on City Council to consider, that might be attached to this. But let's talk and chat over the next 2 weeks and be prepared to talk about it in 2 weeks.
Thank you. Councilmember Winston.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd also like to take this opportunity to just give Councilmember Bond his flowers, no pun intended, for being instrumental in really getting us to this point. His hard work and leadership has really been instrumental in working to come with a consensus that we have gotten to today. And I just wanted to make sure that people have had an opportunity to know about the hard work you put into this process, and that this is also good governance. I think many of us have talked about this process to get to this point, and I think that it's important to make sure that all the people who have had a vested interest in this tree protection ordinance have an opportunity to really see what the consensus is all about and take a look at it, and that way we can move forward in the next couple of weeks. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Winston. And I'll just add to Councilmember Bond's point, the amendments that were proffered, the conversation around recompense, around the tree trust fund. We're coming back to this conversation, y'all. It will be a phase 2 conversation that will include the meatier topics here. And so just know that this isn't a one and done. We're not going to move forward with this legislation when it comes back up before this body, and you'll never hear from us again. This is an iterative process, and my understanding is, at the very least, that we're going to revisit the phase 2 roughly Q1 of next year, which starts in a month and a half. So just know that this isn't the final word on the tree protection ordinance. So with that being said, I move to hold on as amended. Second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
All right, the motion is favorable as amended, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 17 is 22-0-1836. There is a substitute in your packet.
Thank you. Second by Dozier.
Vote is open. The vote is closed.
Okay, substitute is brought forward, 5 yeas, 0 nays.
Substitute caption reads, an ordinance by Councilmember Howard Shook as substituted by Community Development and Human Services Committee to rename Frankie Allen Park to Historic Bagley Park and name the athletic fields as Frankie Allen Fields, to waive certain provisions of the City of Atlanta Code of Ordinances relating to the dedication of public places within the City of Atlanta, which are not applicable when the dedication is initiated by the City of Atlanta and for other purposes.
Move to approve on substitute.
Second.
Second by Winston. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. Would all members please vote? The vote is closed.
The motion is favorable on substitute, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Councilman Westmoreland?
Yeah, no, Councilmember Shook's not here, so in his absence, I'd like to embarrass him and thank him for introducing this piece of legislation and returning the name of this area to its rightful name.
Thank you, Councilman Westmoreland. All right, I believe we are done with ordinances for second read. We're on to resolutions. Please in the next caption.
Item number 18 is 22R4594, a resolution by Councilmember Andrea L. Boone authorizing the City of Atlanta to donate American Rescue Plan Act funds to the Community Farmers Market to support CFM's further expansion of its fresh market markets, which will directly combat the food insecurity effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as create long-term post-pandemic increased local community resilience and food access pursuant to Section 6-306 of the City of Atlanta's Charter in a total amount not to exceed $60,000.00. authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a donation agreement with CFM, which shall detail the actions of CFM to further the development of fresh MARTA markets, to authorize the chief financial officer to make all payments from the accounts listed herein and for other purposes.
We have Ms. Chandra Farley with the Office of Sustainability here. Can you speak to this particular paper? You got anything to add to this paper, I should say? It seems straightforward, but.
Thank you, Councilman Dozier, and to the committee. I do not have anything to add. They are pretty straightforward. We are looking forward to moving these donations through to approval. It's been a few months now that they've been in process, so with the support of Attorney Moses and our Director of Urban Agriculture, Jeolu Baiwu, we're ready to move those and get those dollars out to our community partners so they can move forward with the work that supports our goals here at the city.
Any questions or comments from colleagues?
Second.
Seeing none, I'll move approval. Second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. Vote is closed.
Motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 19 is 22R4595, a resolution by council members Andrea L. Boone and Byron D. Amos requesting the Atlanta Police Department and the Atlanta Department of Transportation to create a proposal to establish a process for street vending during the 2026 FIFA World Cup and for other purposes.
There's an ask for this paper to be held, so I'll go ahead and move to hold. Second by Winston. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
All right, the motion to hold is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 20 is 22R4605, a resolution by Council Member Jason Dozier authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into an agreement with the United States Department of Commerce, Economic Development Administration to remove all federal interest associated with EDA award number listed here, currently capitalizing the Phoenix Loan Fund, amending Resolution 22R3343 to set forth the intent for the Atlanta Development Authority, DBA Invest Atlanta, to continue to administer the Phoenix Loan Fund and for other purposes.
All right, so recognizing that I am the author of this paper, I do want to invite anyone from either Invest Atlanta or the administration to add some additional clarity. But my understanding is, as was stated with the Phoenix Loan Fund, is to allow for the removal of any sort of federal interest associated with what was awarded. I don't know if any colleagues have any questions, but I'll move approval. Second by Westmoreland. Any discussion? Seeing none, please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
The motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 21 is 22R4606, a resolution by Council Member Jason Dozier authorizing the City of Atlanta to donate American Rescue Plan Act funds to the West Atlanta Watershed Alliance to support, or otherwise known as WAWA, to support WAWA's further development of the core outdoor activity center as a public food forest, which will directly combat the food insecurity effects of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as create long-term post-pandemic increased local community resilience pursuant to Section 6-306 of the City of Atlanta's charter in a total amount not to exceed $85,000. Authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a donation agreement with WAWA, which shall detail the actions of WAWA to further the development of the outdoor activity center as a public food forest, to authorize the chief financial officer to make all payments from the accounts listed herein and for other purposes.
We have Chandra Farley once again to speak to this. I actually had a question for you, so if you can add any 2 cents, and then I'll go ahead and ask.
This is similar to the donation agreement that was just recently passed as favorable. West Atlanta Watershed is another critical partner to the City of Atlanta. The Outdoor Activity Center also has a memorandum of understanding with the Department of Parks and Recreation, and is a true foundation in the West Side area, trying to bring attention to the Bush Mountain community. So the ability to continue to improve the Outdoor Activity Center, confirm where its boundaries are, and then also embark on the process to establish a second food forest is central to our ability to continue fighting food insecurity and preparing Atlanta for the long term.
So my question is, recognizing that this is our second food forest, what typically goes into making that a reality? How much time does it take for fruits to bear, if you will? And what does that look like from a community standpoint in terms of their ability to access what is produced in the food forest? I know we typically have a model around urban farming, and I'm familiar with what different institutions have been able to do with that, but this is a new model for me, and I want to be able to promote it as best I can.
Absolutely. I would love to follow up with Jay Olu, who's our Director of Urban Agriculture, and we can forward you perhaps an overview of the process to establish the Browns Mill Food Forest, which quite a number, at least all of the staff I know at Wawa, have been a part of learning from that process, which I know they would like to bring to establishment of the process at the OAC, leading with making sure that that begins with a deep, authentic community engagement process versus sort of a top-down planning process. But we can forward that process over to you and for sharing with the committee.
I would greatly appreciate that, and I think that with between this program and what is happening further down Richland with Patchwork City Farms and what they're doing, I think this is a phenomenal opportunity not only for the Oakland City and Bush Mountain communities, but just showcases what the city of Atlanta can do in terms of innovation and expanding on opportunities where, you know, it's been in our backyard for a long time, but it's great that we're able to.
Absolutely. And they're also have been in conversation about embarking on restoring notice and knowledge in the community that is around the Atlanta Black Cracker Field. And they've been running and had been doing some food donation programs throughout COVID. So I look at this as an opportunity where they would be able to pull from the food forest to help with those boxes and filling. But happy to forward over an overview of the full process of development.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from colleagues? All right, seeing none.
Are you going to plant muscadines?
We probably have no choice, yes, but we'll double check.
All right, motion by Dozier, second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
Motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 22 is 22R4607, a resolution by council members Jason Dozier, Amir Faroki, Byron D. Amos, Liliana Bakhtiari, Alex Wan, Howard Shook, Mary Norwood, Dustin Hillis, Andrea L. Boone, Marcy Collier Overstreet, Antonio Lewis, Michael Julian Bond, Matt Westmoreland, and Keisha Sean Waits, requesting that the city of Atlanta develop a strategy to market affordable housing projects to all qualifying city employees and for other purposes. There's an amendment in your packet.
All right, colleagues, an amendment was sent out related to this paper, but then there's another amendment I would like to add to that amendment. The first being Councilmember Winston would like to add his name to his paper, so I'll move to amend on that front. Second by Westmoreland.
The vote is open. Which member are we adding?
Winston.
Winston. The vote is closed.
And the motion to amend is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Correct. The other amendment is adding a whereas clause that further clarifies what we're trying to accomplish here, and also adds in the what is resolved is asking for the Commissioner of Human Resources to come up with a strategy around ensuring city employees have an opportunity to take part in the city's affordable housing programs. So we're adding the senior advisor to the mayor to that in addition to the HR commissioner. So I'll move to amend. Second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. vote is closed.
The motion to amend carries 6 yeas, 0 nays. And finally, before I make a motion to approve on amendment, or to, just want to clarify for the public what we're trying to accomplish here and why this was so prudent. The minimum wage for city employees is $15 an hour. And multiply that by 40 hours a week times 52 weeks a year, that's about $31,000 a year. Throwing maybe a little bit of overtime, you're looking at maybe $40,000 a year for entry-level city employees. Many city employees, at least in the conversations that I've had with members of our Department of Watershed Management, our frontline employees with the Department of Parks and Recreation, and other departments, choose no longer to work for the city of Atlanta because they cannot afford to live in the city. They move out to Douglas County, to Henry County, to Rockdale County, and they might, Fayetteville, and they might commute for a little bit and see how expensive that is, and they decide to find other opportunities elsewhere. And so I felt it was important that we ensure that our city employees know that we love them, that we care for them, and that we want to ensure that even though we're trying to ensure that they have a fair compensation for the work that they do, find all means available to us to ensure that they have an opportunity to stay in the city in which they're working. We will get better results in terms of constituent services if our city employees are able to reap the benefits of what we are building. And so this is essentially asking for our city leaders to ensure that city employees are considered or contemplated as we are approving affordable housing developments through Invest Atlanta, through Atlanta Beltline Incorporated, and through the projects that the city is leading on with regards to city-owned parcels. Several of those parcels are in my district: 184 Forsyth Street, 143 Alabama, 104 Trinity, and just across the street from my district, you have 2 Peachtree Street. And so we have a lot of big projects that are happening, that are coming, and I want to make sure that our city employees are well regarded as we are looking for opportunities to retain and also attract city employees. They ought to mean something to work for this city, and we're fighting to make sure that we're going to get to a point in which that happens. So with that being said, I move to approve as amended. Second by Bakhtiari. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
All right, motion is favorable as amended, 6 yeas, 0 nays. Next item. I'm sorry, before we move to the next item, I do want to say that this item is dual referred, and it will go before Finance Executive Committee tomorrow. Next item.
Item number 23 is 22R4617, a resolution by council members Liliana Bakhtiari, Jason Dozier, Matt Westmoreland, Andrea L. Boone, Antonio Lewis, Jason Winston, Amir Faroki, Michael Julian Bond, Alex Juan, Keisha Sean Waits, Byron D. Amos, Howard Shook, and Dustin Hillis, requesting that a provision be included in the funding agreement for any residential housing development receiving financial incentives from the City of Atlanta, pursuant to which housing units would be made available to households utilizing housing choice vouchers as a source of income unless the project otherwise receives rental subsidies from the Atlanta Housing Authority, DBA Atlanta Housing, requesting that the Atlanta Development Authority, DBA Invest Atlanta, Atlanta Beltline, Inc., the Fulton County Development Authority, and the Metro Atlanta Rapid Transit Authority adopt policies requiring that a provision be included in the funding agreements for any residential housing developments receiving financial incentives therefrom, pursuant to which housing units will be made available to households utilizing housing choice vouchers as a source of income, unless the project otherwise receives rental subsidy from the Atlanta Housing Authority, DBA Atlanta Housing, and for other purposes.
Councilmember Bakhtiari.
Well done, Jared. Yeah, so this was one, I have to say that I'm super proud of this resolution. I'm also proud to say that everyone on this committee signed on as co-sponsors, so thank you. No, this this legislation will basically ensure that moving forward, that anyone who seeks dollars for any type of living units within the city of Atlanta will have to register with the Atlanta Housing Authority and require that they accept Section 8 housing vouchers. So we have a backlog of over 20,000 people that are waiting to be housed on Section 8 on housing vouchers. So this will be a huge step in that direction. And I'm thankful to the administration and to legal for helping us get this together, and to my team. So I move to approve.
Second. Motion by Bakhtiari, second by Dozier. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. Would all members please vote? And the vote is closed.
Motion is favorable, 6 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 24 is 22R4681, a resolution by Community Development Human Services Committee authorizing the mayor or his designee on behalf of the city of Atlanta to enter into a home capital project agreement with Oaks ATL Community Development, Inc., using U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Home Investment Partnership Program grant funds in an amount not to exceed $421,848.00 for the purpose of providing mixed-use new construction for affordable housing and related development at the property located at 557 Lindsay Street, Northwest Atlanta, Georgia, and for other purposes.
Motion to approve by Westmoreland. I'll go ahead and second. Any discussion? Seeing none, please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
The motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 25 is 22R4682, a resolution by Community Development Human Services Committee authorizing the mayor or his designee on behalf of the city of Atlanta to enter into an agreement with 111 Moreland LLC using U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development Home Investment Partnership Program grant funds in an amount not to exceed $1,000,000 for the purpose of providing demolition and new construction for affordable housing and related development at the property located at 111 Moreland Avenue, Southeast Atlanta, Georgia, and for other purposes.
I'm actually curious about this one. If you could introduce yourself for the public and tell us a little bit about the...
Yeah, absolutely. So earlier this year, we went out for a no.
You can introduce yourself for the public. Sorry.
Absolutely. So Nicole Barnes, Deputy Commissioner of DGCD. So earlier this year, we rolled out a NOFA process, which is our for grants, our procurement process. We had some applications submitted. We did an extensive review. These two applications were approved to move forward with contracting because they met all the requirements of the home program. And so we're eager to roll out some of these older funds. And so they're FY 15, 16, and 17 grant funding. Additionally, because we do have that backlog of grant funds, we just rolled out an additional NOFA. But specific to this program, it is to do that demolition and new construction of that property.
And considering the backlog, is there a risk of losing those funds if we don't spend it down?
Yes, the goal is to expend those funds. Now, we're still in that window where we're not at extreme risk, but the goal is to get those funds out the door as soon as possible.
How much more do we have to go before we're...
So hopefully, after we just close out this NOFA, we're in the process of reviewing those applications. We'll be really close. The goal is that in the next calendar year that we'll have all of those contracts awarded and all those funds allocated to those developers to do this work.
Questions or comments from colleagues? Seeing none, I'll move approval. Second by Winston. Please open the vote.
Vote is open. The vote is closed.
Motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays.
Thank you.
Next item.
Item number 26 is 22R4683, a resolution by Community Development Human Services Committee authorizing the mayor on behalf of the city of Atlanta to enter into a memorandum of understanding with the Cabbagetown Initiative Community Development Corporation, Inc., and for other purposes.
Deputy Commissioner Voss, good to see you again.
Thank you. Doug Voss, Department of Parks and Recreation. Just wanted to mention the Cabbagetown Initiative has been a long-standing supporter of the city and the Parks Department, working in conjunction with us to develop, maintain, and develop Cabbagetown Park. Cabbagetown Park has become a model for other communities to rally around their park and raise additional funds. This would allow us to enter into a new MOU with the Cabbagetown Initiative. There'll be a second piece that'll be coming forward after the first of the year. There is a community center that is located in this park. And I just wanted to thank Councilwoman Bakhtiari, who has been working very closely with us, and the law department. To be honest, there's been a number of agreements. We probably have 30 or 40 agreements, and they are a little bit different. And we're trying to streamline those, so we're working closely with the law department just to make sure that they're all moving in the same direction. And so did want to thank Councilmember Bakhtiari and law department for their assistance.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Bakhtiari.
I also wanted to thank Parks, Doug, especially you, for taking the time to have these meetings with the neighborhood around shaping the agreement. So y'all have been amazing.
Thank you.
Really appreciate it. So move to approve.
Motion by Bakhtiari, second by Westmoreland. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
The motion is favorable, 6 yeas, 0 nays. Next item.
Item number 27 is 22R4684, a resolution by Community Development Human Services Committee authorizing the mayor or his designee to enter into a contractual agreement on behalf of the Department of Parks and Recreation with Kissberg Parker Fry, JV, Lichty Commercial Construction, Inc., and SoCo Contracting Company, Inc., under the 2020 Community Development Block Grant Program in an amount not to exceed $950,000 for ADA improvements and playground projects and for other purposes.
And I believe this item, there was a request to file this paper from the administration. I'll move to file, second by Westmoreland. Actually, Councilman Hillis.
Yeah, just wondering, Deputy Commissioner Voss, if you could enlighten us as to why this needs to be filed, given it's ADA improvements and playground equipment, which I think we all agree are sorely needed. But
No, absolutely. And what it is actually is that this paper actually does not complete. There's two parts to this process, and thanks to the law department, we're able to complete those all in one piece of legislation, which will be forth in January when all the codes are attributed. So it is still moving forward. This piece of legislation wouldn't actually get us to the point where we could actually purchase the material, and we've been advised we can do that in one piece of legislation. So rather than having two floating around, that's the only reason. I will say, and we're so excited, these CDBG grants are booked from 2020, and they include, I can let you know, this will actually be of interest to you, ADA improvements at Center Hill, Deerwood, and South Bend, and new playgrounds at Chosewood, Verbena, Tremont, and Lucius Simon that used to be South Atlanta Parks. So it's still moving forward. It's just there's no need to have two pieces of legislation. We can do it in one.
all right, good to hear. Thanks for the clarity.
Thank you, Councilman Hillis. So there's a motion and a second. Please open the vote.
The vote is open. The vote is closed.
The motion to file is favorable, 6 yeas, 0 nays. I believe that concludes ordinances for second reading. Before we move to dual referred, I do want to, I realized that I didn't mention that resolution, I'm sorry, we're done with resolutions, but the resolution 22-R-4617, that is dual referred and will be forwarded to the Finance Executive tomorrow. So I just wanted to state that. All right, moving on to dual referred.
Item number 28 is 22R4598, resolution by Councilmember Antonio Lewis, Keisha Sean Waits, and Jason Winston, waiving and releasing the outstanding lien in the amount of $86,187.05 on approximately 3.65 acres of real property located at 3724 Forest Park Road, Atlanta, Georgia. For the purpose of transfer of the property to the City of Atlanta to be dedicated for a public park, as is permitted under City of Atlanta Code of Ordinances, Part 3, Land Development Code, Appendix E, Atlanta Housing Code of 1987, Article 5, Judicial NREM, Section 56, lien waiver, Section 56H, lien waiver and release, and for other purposes.
All right, and I believe this, sorry.
Sure. This was substituted in Public Safety and Legal Administration yesterday. The substitute is in your packet. It adds dates that were missing.
And do we need a substitute on our end, or? Okay, so this was favorable unanimously out of committee. I'll go ahead and move to approve. Second by Hillis.
The vote is open. And the vote is closed.
All right, motion is favorable, 5 yeas, 0 nays. I believe that concludes our legislative agenda. Any general remarks? Seeing no remarks, we'll go ahead and adjourn. Thank y'all.